Chapter 667. The ancient sacred sect and serene sect had already reached a consensus. However, at this moment, someone shouted. Following Xiao Chen's shout, as expected, everyone's gaze gathered on Xiao Chen. This guy. No one expected Xiao Chen to speak at this moment. Wang Zong smiled helplessly. He was indeed too bold. At this moment, not only were Qin Yu and Yun Luan, but Saint Qing Ju and Saint Red Lotus were also present. Even Saint Tianfeng was not qualified to speak, let alone Xiao Chen. Facing everyone's gaze, Xiao Chen's expression was firm. There was no way out. Holding Gu Lingyao's hand, Xiao Chen strode to Saint Qing Ju's light screen and bowed. Tianfeng Xingzong's disciple Xiao Chen greets Saint Qing Ju. Facing a saint from the ancient sacred sect, Xiao Chen could not disrespect. However, Saint Qing Ju did not get angry when facing Xiao Chen. Instead, he looked at Xiao Chen with interest and said calmly, "Who do you think you are? Do you know what kind of people are here? Even your sect master, the Heavenly Wen Saint, is not qualified to speak. How dare you speak so rudely?" "I know," Xiao Chen replied after hearing that. "Since you know, why do you still dare to speak?" Saint Qing Ju asked. "I have no choice," Xiao Chen said. Xiao Chen knew the consequences of speaking recklessly in such an occasion. However, he had no choice but to do so. Otherwise, wouldn't he have to watch Gu Lingyao be taken away by serene sect? Compared to Xiao Chen's calmness, Gu Lingyao was much more nervous. She held Xiao Chen's hand tightly and hid half of her body behind Xiao Chen. Hearing Xiao Chen's reply, Saint Qing Ju glanced at Gu Lingyao with a strange glint in his eyes. He then took the initiative to speak. "You want me and the ancient sacred sect to protect this little girl?" "Yes." Since Saint Qing Ju took the initiative to speak, Xiao Chen also straightforwardly replied. At this point, Xiao Chen paused, then said seriously. "Lingyao is also a disciple of Tianfeng Xingzong. Tianfeng Xingzong's Tianfeng mansion belongs to the ancient sacred sect. Sacred Sovereign, may I ask if the ancient sacred sect rules over the ancient sacred province? Does that mean that you have the responsibility to protect the various major forces in the ancient sacred province?" "Yes," Saint Qingjue replied without hesitation in the face of Xiao Chen's question. "Since that's the case, serene sect wants to take Lingyao away. Sacred Sovereign, should the ancient sacred sect step forward to protect her?" Xiao Chen continued to ask. Knowing what Xiao Chen wanted to say, Saint Qing Ju's answer disappointed Xiao Chen. Saint Qing Ju said slowly with a complicated expression on his young and handsome face. "Little guy, I know what you mean, but this matter cannot be done. This little girl is very important to the serene sect. If we want to protect her, we will have to go to war with the serene sect. I'm not afraid to tell you that for her, the ancient sacred sect will not go to war with the serene sect." Xiao Chen didn't know that the relationship between Tianfeng Xingzong and the ancient sacred sect wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface. Saint Tianfeng was also a saint of the ancient sacred sect, and the reward of Tianfeng Xingzong was also instructed by the ancient sacred sect. To put it simply, Tianfeng Xingzong was like an outer sect of the ancient sacred sect. The disciples of Tianfeng Xingzong could be considered half a disciple of the ancient sacred sect. This was also the reason why the talented disciples of Tianfeng Xingzong would eventually head to the ancient sacred sect to cultivate. It wasn't just Tianfeng Xingzong. Other sacred sects like the Tianyue sacred sect could also be considered as branches of the ancient sacred sect. Generally speaking, there was only one sacred sect in the entire ancient sacred state, and that was the ancient sacred sect. The other sacred sects were all branches of the ancient sacred sect, or could be considered as outer sections. With such a relationship, the ancient sacred sect would definitely protect Gu Lingyao if it was an ordinary problem. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sent Qinyu here. However, the problem now was that Gu Lingyao was far too important to the serene sect. She was so important that the serene sect would not give an even half a step. This was not difficult to deduce from the Red Lotus Saint's words earlier. Apart from Gu Lingyao having to return to the serene sect, the serene sect could agree to any request of the ancient sacred sect. This showed how important Gu Lingyao was to the Sacredine sect. In this way, if the ancient sacred sect wanted to forcefully protect Gu Lingyao, there would only be one result, and that was a war between the two sacred sects. However, Saint Qingju also said very directly that the ancient sacred sect wouldn't go to this step for Gu Lingyao. Hearing Saint Qingju's answer, Xiaochen fell silent. At the same time, Saint Red Lotus, who had been silent all this time, said faintly, "Yunluan, bring Gu Lingyao and return immediately." Hearing Saint Red Lotus's words, Yunluan immediately walked towards Gu Lingyao. Seeing this, Xiaochen's first reaction was to fight to the death. Since the ancient sacred sect wasn't willing to protect Gu Lingyao, he could only rely on himself. However, wanting to rely on his own strength to protect Gu Lingyao was no different from a fool's dream. At this moment, Xiaoxing's voice rang out in his mind. "Kid, if you make a move now, you're dead for sure. Listen to me, let Gu Lingyao go to the Sacredine sect first. She won't be in danger for the time being, and you can also use this time to increase your strength. Only when you become the holy son of the ancient sacred sect will you be able to save Gu Lingyao. You're just throwing an egg at a rock." Seeing that Xiaochen was determined to fight to the death, Xiaoxing advised. If Xiaochen were to fight now, there would only be one result, and that was death. There was no doubt about it. Following Xiaoxing's words, Gu Lingyao also mustered her courage and gently pulled Xiaochen's hand. "Brother Xiaochen, I'll go with them." With Gu Lingyao's intelligence, she naturally knew what would happen if Xiaochen made a move now. Therefore, even though she was extremely unwilling, Gu Lingyao still chose to follow Yunluan to the Sacredine sect in order to protect Xiaochen. Hearing Gu Lingyao's words, Xiaochen was stunned. However, before he could say anything, Gu Lingyao tiptoed and took the initiative to kiss Xiaochen. After a long while, the two separated. Gu Lingyao's eyes were red as she said, "Brother Xiaochen, promise me that you won't do anything stupid." Xiaochen was already very clear about Gu Lingyao's intentions. Hearing this, he fell silent for a moment before nodding heavily. "Take good care of yourself and wait for me. I will definitely go to the Sacredine sect to pick you up." "Okay." Hearing Xiaochen's words, Gu Lingyao nodded. Then, she reluctantly broke free from Xiaochen's embrace. Holding back the tears in her eyes, she walked step by step towards Yunluan. Without the help of the ancient Sacredine sect, everything was meaningless. Gu Lingyao had made her choice. However, Xiaochen was extremely furious. This was definitely the most humiliating moment in his life. He couldn't even protect his own woman. Please add, please vote, please recommend. If you want to chat about Sword Master of 8 Desolation with more like-minded people, follow Excellent Literature on WeChat. Chapter 668. Not daring to turn back, afraid that he would regret it the moment he did so, Gu Lingyao walked to Yunluan's side. Yunluan pulled Gu Lingyao behind her and threw her to the 4 disciples of Sacredine sect. Yunluan then looked at Xiaochen and said with indifference, "You are very smart. Otherwise, you would be a corpse now." The meaning of Yunluan's words was clear. Xiaochen was smart enough not to make a move. Otherwise, she would have killed Xiaochen without hesitation. Looking at the current situation, without the protection of the ancient Sacredine sect, Yunluan could easily kill Xiaochen. Hearing Yunluan's words, Xiaochen did not reply. He looked at Yunluan calmly and coldly. Seeing this, Yunluan smiled coldly and turned to leave with Gu Lingyao. He didn't roar as he had imagined, and he didn't say anything like "I want revenge" or "I don't want to bully a poor young man." At this moment, Xiaochen was like a ferocious beast hiding in the darkness. His pair of scarlet tiger-like eyes stared fixedly at the Sacredine sect, hoping that one day, he would be able to use his own strength to wash away today's humiliation and save the woman he loved. In Xiaochen's opinion, the oath of revenge was just the anger of the weak. He was not a match for them, so what was the point of saying all this? It was better to bury the hatred deep in his heart and use his actions to prove everything. His gaze was fixed on Gu Lingyao until she disappeared from his sight. As Gu Lingyao, Yunluan and the rest left, Saint Red Lotus spoke from the light screen. Within 3 days, the compensation from Sacredine sect will be delivered. Farewell, Saint Qingju. Please, Saint Qingju said indifferently. Immediately, Saint Qingju's light screen disappeared. Saint Qingju looked at Xiaochen indifferently and the light screen also slowly dissipated. With the two saints leaving, the matter came to an end. Xiaochen turned and left without saying a word. This matter had a huge impact on Xiaochen. At the same time, Xiaochen personally experienced what it was like to be stepped on. What's wrong? Can't get back up? Is it humiliating to be stepped on by others? Xiaosheng said. It is indeed very humiliating. Hearing Xiaosheng's words, Xiaochen replied softly. It's good that you still know humiliation. Only in this way can you prove that you still have the heart to move forward bravely. As long as you don't give up, anything is possible. Hearing Xiaochen's answer, Xiaosheng laughed loudly. In fact, Xiaosheng knew very well that the blow this time was indeed too big for Xiaochen. Once Xiaochen couldn't bear it, his state of mind was likely to be shattered. But now, it seemed that he worried too much. Xiaochen was stronger than he thought. Indeed, Xiaochen wasn't defeated by this blow. But ultimately, one of the reasons was Guling Yao. No matter how strong the Sacredine sect was, Xiaochen wouldn't accept his fate. Because once he gave up and became dispirited, who would be Guling Yao? Sacredine sect was very strong, but no matter how strong they were, Xiaochen couldn't give up. He silently prepared to leave, but unexpectedly, Qingyu actually took the initiative to talk to Xiaochen. With the same carefree smile on his face, Qingyu blocked Xiaochen's path and said with a smile, Actually, it's not that there's no way to save your little girlfriend. As long as you can become the holy son of the ancient sacred sect, it's possible. Hearing Qinyu's words, Xiaochen looked at him. After being stunned for a moment, he said calmly, Thank you for your advice. There's no need to thank me. I'm just telling you a method. As for whether you can succeed or not, it's still up to you. However, I personally have high hopes for you. I look forward to seeing you in the ancient sacred sect one day. Facing Xiaochen's thanks, Qingyu waved his hand nonchalantly and smiled. Then, he turned and strode away. Because of the battle between Qingyu and Yunluan, the entire direct disciple area was destroyed. It would take some time to restore it to its original state. Therefore, the direct disciples could only temporarily stay in the core disciples' residence. Xiaochen was also arranged to stay in the 5th core disciples' residence for the time being. Perhaps afraid that Xiaochen would take things too hard, Yifeng actually personally made a trip to comfort Xiaochen. However, Xiaochen didn't take much of it to heart. Because Yifeng was just trying to make Xiaochen forget about Guling Yao. After staying at Xiaochen's place for about an hour, Yifeng finally got up and left. Walking out of the courtyard, Yifeng sighed softly and said, I hope this kid doesn't do anything stupid. He knew that Xiaochen didn't take his words to heart. He sighed softly. The truth was just as Yifeng thought. Xiaochen naturally wouldn't give up. Once Yifeng left, Xiaochen anxiously asked Xiaosheng. Ancestor, you said that Ling Yao wouldn't be in danger for the time being. Is that true? Did you see something? Tell me quickly. The reason Xiaochen chose to compromise was mainly because Xiaosheng promised that Guling Yao wouldn't be in danger for the time being. Otherwise, Xiaochen wouldn't have allowed Guling Yao to follow Yunluan to the Sacredine sect. Faced with Xiaochen's question, Xiaosheng didn't hide anything this time. Instead, he calmly said, Have you heard of the Moon God physique? The Moon God physique was an extremely powerful physique. At the same time, it was also the foundation of the Sacredine sect. This was because the first sect master of the Sacredine sect had the Moon God physique. Moreover, the first rule of the Sacredine sect clearly stated that only those with the Moon God physique could inherit the position of sect master. Therefore, every sect master of the Sacredine sect had the Moon God physique. However, the Moon God physique was very unique. Only one Moon God physique would appear in every generation. Moreover, only after the previous Moon God physique died would a new Moon God physique be born. Therefore, every sect master of the Sacredine sect could be said to be predestined from birth. Moreover, the Moon God physique was born in 2 people. In other words, the new moon god physique would appear in two different people. At that time, the moon god physique wouldn't be complete. It could be said to be incomplete. Only when one of the two moon god physiques successfully swallowed the other moon god physique and merged the two into one could it be considered a true moon god physique. Previously, Xiaoxing had already seen that Gu Lingyao had the moon god physique. However, because it was still in the incomplete stage, it didn't display the terrifying power of the moon god physique. As for the Sacredine sect's visit now, it was obvious that they had found the other half of the moon god physique and had been nurturing it. They wanted to let that person swallow the other half of Gu Lingyao's moon god physique. It was a very mysterious physique. After hearing Xiaoxing's explanation, Xiao Chen's face revealed a sinister expression. Then if Lingyao was swallowed by the other half of the moon god physique, what would happen to her? Her body would die and her Dao would disappear. Xiaoxing calmly replied. The moon god physique was born in two people. However, in the end, only one person could survive. This was the special characteristic of the moon god physique. It couldn't be changed. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 669. He told Xiaochen about the characteristics of the moon god physique. Xiaochen asked worriedly, Ancestor, how are you so sure that Lingyao's life won't be in danger for the time being? Now that he knew why the Sacredine sect wanted to take away Gu Lingyao, Xiaochen began to worry again. He was afraid that Gu Lingyao would be devoured by the other half of the moon god physique. Xiaoxing replied, there are many conditions that must be fulfilled for the moon god physique to appear and devour. Let's not even talk about the first condition. One of the two moon god physiques must be at the Tao King realm. That's the first and second condition. The two moon god physiques are actually on par with each other. In other words, one of them must possess overwhelming strength to suppress the other half of the moon god physique and complete the devouring process. My guess is that the other half of the moon god physique is probably the holy maiden of the Sacredine sect. However, even if that's the case, she definitely hasn't reached the Tao King realm. As a result, she doesn't possess the conditions to devour Gu Lingyao in the short term. Secondly, before the devouring process, the Sacredine sect will definitely think of ways to suppress Gu Lingyao's moon god physique in order to ensure that nothing goes wrong. This process will take a very long time. After all, how can the moon god physique be suppressed so easily? As a result, kid, you have at least 20 years to 50 years. During this period of time, you have to become the holy son of the ancient Sacredine sect at the very least. The Sacredine sect definitely wouldn't rashly allow the other half of the moon god physique to devour Gu Lingyao because it was very likely to cause a backlash. At that time, it would be hard to say who would devour who. As a result, the Sacredine sect had a very long time to prepare before the devouring process. At the same time, the other half of the moon god physique had to raise her cultivation to the Tao King realm. Hearing Xiaoxing's words, Xiaochen secretly heaved a sigh of relief. As long as there was time, everything would be fine. As long as there was time, there was still a chance. Speaking up to hear, Xiaoxing suddenly revealed a treacherous smile. Hee, kid, I have to say that you're really lucky to have obtained the heart of a moon god physique. You have to know that in the Heavenly River continent, every woman who possessed the moon god physique is worthy of the title of the #1 beauty of the continent. Not only is her beauty unparalleled, but she's also extremely powerful. Back then, the moon god physique in my time, Xiaoxing suddenly changed the topic. Regarding this, Xiaochen obviously wasn't in the mood to talk about it. Stop. I say, Ancestor, is this the time to talk about this? You little brat, what I meant to tell you is that as the saying goes, fortune comes with misfortune, and misfortune comes with fortune. This might be very dangerous for Gu Lingyao, and she might even lose her life. But on the other hand, this is also her good fortune. Xiaoxing was no longer joking when Xiaochen asked him to stop, and he spoke very seriously. Hearing this, Xiaochen didn't know what Xiaochen meant. Puzzled, he asked, Ancestor, what do you mean by this? Kid, are you stupid? Think about it. Isn't the sacredine sect so important to Gu Lingyao so that the other half of the moon god physique can devour her? On the other hand, if we can reverse the situation, won't Gu Lingyao be able to devour the other half of the moon god physique? When the two fuse into one, the true moon god physique will be born. That last will definitely be a great help to you in the future. Moreover, once Gu Lingyao successfully devours the other half of the moon god physique, she will be the sect master of the sacredine sect regardless of whether the sacredine sect is willing or not. At that time, I don't need to say more about your position in the sacredine sect, right? Xiaoxing said with a smile. Everything in the world had two sides. Hearing this, Xiaoqin also understood this principle. However, it seemed that this was still too far away. Right now, he needed to think about how to increase his strength and become the holy son of the ancient sacredine sect as soon as possible. Otherwise, if he couldn't even save Gu Lingyao, then what was the point of talking about it? After being enlightened by Xiaoxing, Xiao Chen's mood improved a little. Since things had already come to this, the only thing Xiao Chen could do was to think of a way to save Gu Lingyao as soon as possible. Thinking of this, Xiao Chen also made up his mind to go to the Wind Plains as soon as possible and find the heavenly spiritual pool for Xiaosheng. However, before that, Xiao Chen still needed to make some preparations. There were many things that he needed. The next morning, Xiao Chen went to Yifeng and said that he wanted to see the heavenly Wind Saint. In order to go to the Wind Plains, he needed the Black Armor Talisman. However, the Black Armor Talisman could only be obtained with the help of Tianfeng Xingzong. After all, it was a saint-grade talisman. Xiao Chen was very eager to go to the Wind Plains. It was not only because of Xiaosheng, but also because of himself. During this period of time, Xiao Chen had also looked up a lot of information about the Wind Plains. Although the Wind Plains was one of the 4 great deathlands of the Tiana continent, it was undeniable that because of its danger and lack of people, there were many heavenly treasures in the Wind Plains. There were even some unexpected opportunities. Going to the Wind Plains could not only solve the problem of Xiaosheng, but also quickly increase his own strength. It could be said that it was the best of both worlds. As for the danger, Xiao Chen did not care about it now. When he heard that Xiao Chen wanted to see the Heavenly Wind Saint, Yifeng did not refuse. After asking the Heavenly Wind Saint for permission, Yifeng brought Xiao Chen to the peak of the Heavenly Wind Sacred Mountain. This was the first time they had come to the Heavenly Wind Saint's residence. It was a very simple hut, and this was where the Heavenly Wind Saint lived. When Xiao Chen and Yifeng arrived, the Heavenly Wind Saint was sitting cross-legged on a praying mat outside the hut with his eyes slightly closed. "Great Elder, you go first. I want to talk to this little guy alone." Hearing the Heavenly Wind Saint's words, Yifeng respectfully nodded. After Yifeng left, the Heavenly Wind Saint opened his eyes and looked at Xiao Chen. "What, you still haven't thought it through? Do you think that the Tianfeng Xingzong and the ancient sacred sect are useless?" Xiao Chen did not expect the Heavenly Wind Saint to ask about this matter. Regarding this, he did not know how to answer. Seeing that Xiao Chen chose to remain silent, the Heavenly Wind Saint did not blame him and sighed lightly. "Xiao Chen, this matter is just as senior brother Qing Ju said. If the ancient sacred sect does not give in, the sacredine sect will definitely invade. When the time comes, the two sects will go to war, and the consequences will be unimaginable." Tianfeng Xingzong obviously knew about Gu Lingyao's secret, and also knew how important Gu Lingyao was to the sacredine sect. Perhaps in the eyes of Tianfeng Xingzong, Xiao Chen would never be able to see Gu Lingyao in this lifetime. Her fate was already sealed, and that was to obtain the other half of the moon god body. He wanted to persuade Xiao Chen to think things through. There were some things that you knew were impossible, but you still insisted on doing it. Otherwise, you would only be sending yourself to your death. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 670. The Tianfeng Saint clearly knew more than Yifeng. He already knew that Gu Lingyao had the moon god body and knew why the ancient sacred sect had given in. What Tianfeng Saint really wanted to see was for Xiao Chen to forget about this matter. Ever since Xiao Chen joined the ancient sacred sect, the Tianfeng saint had been paying attention to Xiao Chen and thought highly of him. He even thought that Xiao Chen might become the holy son in the future. Tianfeng saint naturally did not want such a good seedling to ruin Xiao Chen's future. He wanted to persuade Xiao Chen to give up on Guling Yao. However, as soon as the Tianfeng saint finished speaking, a voice that shocked him was heard. "Little Feng Feng, after so many years, you are still the same. They are in love with each other, but you want Xiao Chen to forget about that little girl. Are you trying to break them up?" As soon as he said that, Saint Tianfeng, who had been calm the whole time, was stunned. That was because Xiao Sheng's remnant soul was slowly floating out of Xiao Chen's body. Although the soul was floating, the Tianfeng saint still recognized Xiao Sheng. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. "Senior Xiao Sheng?" The Tianfeng saint addressed Xiao Sheng as senior. Xiao Chen was not too surprised. Xiao Sheng had already told Xiao Chen about him and the Tianfeng saint last night. According to Xiao Sheng, the Tianfeng saint was only a direct disciple of the ancient sacred sect. By chance, Xiao Sheng had saved the Tianfeng saint's life again. The Tianfeng saint was very grateful, and Xiao Sheng also thought that this kid was not bad. He knew that the Tianfeng saint was not a bad person. In addition, Xiao Sheng had saved his life before. This was why Xiao Sheng dared to expose his existence. He had no choice. Now that Xiao Chen was in a hurry to go to the Wind Plains and improve his strength, he needed someone powerful to help him in secret. At the very least, Xiao Chen needed to become the sacred son of the ancient sacred sect in 20 years or 50 years. The difficulty of this was not something that Xiao Chen could achieve with his own efforts. He also needed the help of countless heavenly materials and earthly treasures. Without enough heavenly materials and earthly treasures in a good enough cultivation environment, even if Xiao Chen was the reincarnation of a god, it would be impossible for him to become the son of God, let alone a genius like him. Now, Xiao Sheng was only a remnant soul and could not help Xiao Chen very much. After thinking about it, Xiao Sheng finally felt that the person who could help Xiao Chen the most was the Tianfeng saint. Firstly, he was a saint. With his power, he could give all the resources of the Tianfeng Shengzong to Xiao Chen. In this way, it would be much easier for Xiao Chen to enter the ancient sacred sect. In the ancient sacred sect, the Tianfeng saint also had a certain amount of authority and could help Xiao Chen. Most importantly, the Tianfeng saint was a trustworthy person, at least to Xiao Sheng. After considering the above reasons and weighing the pros and cons, Xiao Sheng decided to expose his existence to the Tianfeng saint. The Tianfeng saint did not expect to see Xiao Sheng again. He stood there in a daze, without any of the dignity of a saint. After being in a daze for a long while, the Tianfeng saint became excited. Xiao Sheng was the person he admired and worshipped the most. It was easy to imagine how the Tianfeng saint felt when he saw him again. He looked like an obedient child who had seen a great hero. In front of Xiao Sheng, the Tianfeng saint seemed to be a completely different person. Xiao Sheng looked at the Tianfeng saint with a smile and did not beat around the bush. He directly stated his intentions. "Xiao Feng Feng," the Tianfeng saint heard that Xiao Sheng wanted him to help Xiao Chen with all his strength from today onwards. At the same time, he also wanted to prepare all kinds of defensive artifacts and black armor talismans for Xiao Chen to go to the Wind Plains. In the face of Xiao Sheng's request, the Tianfeng saint agreed without hesitation. Finally, the Tianfeng saint asked cautiously, Senior Xiao Sheng, is this Xiao Chen your?" The Tianfeng saint was obviously very curious about the relationship between Xiao Sheng and Xiao Chen. Xiao Sheng smiled and said, "My name is Xiao Sheng, and this kid is Xiao Chen. What do you think our relationship is?" "Xiao Chen, Xiao Sheng, this." "Senior, don't tell me Xiao Chen is your son?" After being reminded by Xiao Sheng, the Tianfeng saint pondered for a moment and asked in astonishment. Upon hearing the Tianfeng saint's words, Xiao Sheng shouted angrily, "Scram, Xiao Chen is a descendant of the Xiao family." After revealing his and Xiao Chen's identities to the Tianfeng saint, Xiao Sheng returned to Xiao Chen's body after chatting for a while. the Tianfeng Saint also started to prepare the black armor talismans and various defensive artifacts for Xiaochen to go to the Wind Plains. At the same time, the Tianfeng Saint also told Xiaochen that in the future, all the cultivation secret realms in Tianfeng Zone could be used by Xiaochen for free. There was no need to deduct any glory sect contribution points. Using all the cultivation secret realms for free was definitely a first in the history of Tianfeng Zone. Xiaochen naturally bowed and thanked the Tianfeng Saint. With the Tianfeng Saint's help, it was naturally much more convenient for Xiaochen. In the next few days, because he had to wait for the Tianfeng Saint to collect the black armor talismans, Xiaochen could only choose to cultivate in Tianfeng Zone. 3 days passed in a row. On this day, a person that Xiaochen had expected, but he did not expect, came to Tianfeng Zone. He was Gu Lingyao's father, Gu Qi. Obviously, Gu Qi also knew about Gu Lingyao's situation. He sat opposite Xiaochen in the room and said with a sorrowful expression, "These things would have come sooner or later. When Lingyao was born, I had already expected it. However, I did not expect the Holy Yin sect to act so quickly. Originally, I wanted you and Lingyao to enter the Ancient Saint sect together, and you to become the Holy Son of the Ancient Saint sect as soon as possible. This way, perhaps the Holy Yin sect would be afraid to act. But it seems like it's still a little too late." Now that things had come to this, Gu Qi told Xiaochen his original plan. Hearing Gu Qi's words, Xiaochen did not say anything. After a pause, Gu Qi continued. "Back then, when I forced you and Lingyao to be engaged, it was indeed selfish. I wanted you to protect Lingyao. Now that you know the truth of the matter, if you don't want to get involved in this muddy water, I won't blame you." Since things had come to this, no matter what Xiaochen chose, Gu Qi would not blame him. Hearing this, Xiaochen, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. His tone was calm, but incomparably firm. "Since Lingyao and I are already engaged, I naturally have to save her. Sect Master Gu, before Lingyao is devoured, I will definitely become the Holy Son of the Ancient Saint sect and successfully save Lingyao." Hearing Xiaochen's words, Gu Qi was stunned at first, but then he nodded with a gratified expression. He did not misjudge Xiaochen back then. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 671. This time, Gu Qi didn't hide anything from Xiaochen. He told him everything that had happened since Gu Lingyao's birth. In fact, Gu Qi and Gu Lingyao were both from the Sacred Yin Prefecture. Gu Qi was the same as Tianfeng Saint. He was also the patriarch of a Sacred Yin Prefecture. He could also be considered as a saint of the Sacred Yin Prefecture. However, when Gu Lingyao was born, the birth of the moon god physique was accompanied by a strange phenomenon. There were two strange phenomena that day. One was Gu Lingyao, and the other was in the Sacred Yin Prefecture. In other words, one of the two people with the moon god physique was Gu Lingyao, and the other was the granddaughter of the great elder of the Sacred Yin Prefecture. It was ridiculous. The two people with the moon god physique were born in the Sacred Yin Prefecture. Moreover, the Sacred Yin Prefecture knew that Gu Lingyao had the moon god physique at the first moment because of the strange phenomenon. At the same time, the other person with the moon god physique was the granddaughter of the great elder. Therefore, Gu Lingyao was destined to be the other half of the moon god physique from the moment she was born. The great elder of the Sacred Yin Prefecture was the number one person under the patriarch. Her strength was extremely terrifying. She had the cultivation of the sage accomplished realm. If it wasn't for the fact that the Tiana continent didn't have any source of origin energy, she might have already broken through to the quasi-sage realm. Everything seemed to have been predestined when she was born. In fact, it was indeed so. Only a month after Gu Lingyao was born, the people of the Sacred Yin Prefecture came to pick up Gu Lingyao. They said that they had taken a fancy to Gu Lingyao's talent. However, how could Gu Qi not know that the Sacred Yin Prefecture wanted to raise Gu Lingyao in captivity and wait for the right time to devour her moon god physique in one fell swoop? He was unwilling to watch Gu Lingyao be swallowed up by the other half of the moon god physique. Gu Qi was unwilling to accept this. They both had the moon god physique, so why was his daughter destined to be swallowed up the moment she was born? Instead of waiting to be captured, Gu Qi fled with Gu Lingyao. However, in the process, Gu Lingyao mother was also killed by the Sacredine sect. Gu Qi then brought Gu Lingyao all the way out of the Sacredine continent and went to the ancient sacred continent to establish the celestial equal sect. After learning that Gu Qi was actually a saint, Xiaochen was still a little shocked. The two of them chatted for an entire night. Early the next morning, Gu Qi left. He was going to the Sacredine prefecture. Gu Lingyao had already been captured. If he wanted to save her, Xiaochen could only borrow the power of the ancient sacred sect. Gu Qi did not object to this, but as her father, he obviously could not be indifferent. Therefore, he was prepared to go to the Sacredine prefecture. If Xiaochen's side did not succeed, then at the last moment, Gu Qi would personally rescue Gu Lingyao. Of course, the possibility of this was very low. Even if Gu Qi was a saint, trying to rescue Gu Lingyao from the hands of the Sacredine prefecture alone was no different from hitting a rock with an egg. However, he did not have a better way. The best result was naturally that Xiaochen's side could succeed. He let Xiaochen do as he pleased. In the end, Xiaochen personally sent Gu Qi off. As for the celestial equal sect, he had already handed it over to the first elder to manage. After personally sending Gu Qi off, Xiaochen continued to cultivate. It was useless to think about anything now. The only way was to become the sacred son of the ancient sacred sect as soon as possible. 5 days passed. On this day, the Tianfeng saint finally summoned Xiaochen. Xiaochen, the Tianfeng saint, and Xiaosheng sat facing each other at the peak of the Tianfeng sacred mountain. First, the Tianfeng saint bowed to Xiaosheng. Then, the Tianfeng saint directly handed over the black armor talisman and some defensive artifacts to Xiaochen. In the past few days, the Tianfeng saint could be said to have exhausted all his efforts to find the black armor talisman. However, because the black armor talisman was too precious and time was tight, the Tianfeng saint only obtained 3 black armor talismans. However, this was already very difficult. After all, the black armor talisman was a saint-grade talisman. It was naturally very precious. In addition to the 3 black armor talismans, the Tianfeng saint also gave Xiaochen more than 10 heaven-grade defensive spiritual treasures. Xiaochen, the wind plane is very dangerous. There are too few black armor talismans. You have to be careful when using them. These heaven-grade spiritual treasures are enough in the outer area. Only use the black armor talismans when you go deeper into the wind plane, the Tianfeng saint reminded Xiaochen. Hearing the Tianfeng saint's words, Xiaochen nodded. Then, he stood up and bowed to the Tianfeng saint. It had to be said that the Tianfeng saint had really helped him a lot. Not only did he find the black armor talisman for him, but Xiaochen's cultivation had also improved a lot in the past few days when he cultivated in the various secret realms of Tianfeng Zone. He was only one step away from breaking through to the minor success of the Dao validation realm. In terms of foundation, the Tianfeng saint was naturally far inferior to the ancient sacred sect. However, the secret realms of Tianfeng Zone were indeed rare treasures. In the Tianqian continent, it was definitely an unprecedented cultivation holy land. Xiaochen thanked the Tianfeng saint from the bottom of his heart. The Tianfeng saint waved his hand and said indifferently, "There's no need for that. There's actually another matter that I called you here today." There was one more thing that he wanted to tell Xiaochen. Hearing this, Xiaochen sat down again. The Tianfeng saint continued. According to the latest news from the ancient sacred sect, the ancient martial arts sage assembly will be held in 3 years. At that time, all the sacred sects in the ancient sacred state will participate. This is also the best time for you to enter the ancient sacred sect and kill them all. The ancient martial arts sage assembly was a large-scale event held by the ancient sacred sect. All the sacred sects in the ancient sacred state would bring their direct disciples to participate. Every time the ancient martial arts sage assembly ended, these direct disciples would enter the ancient sacred sect to cultivate. Therefore, this was a rare opportunity for Xiaochen. After all, if he wanted to become a holy son of the ancient sacred sect, he would first have to enter the ancient sacred sect to cultivate. Hearing the Tianfeng saint's words, Xiaochen muttered softly, "The ancient martial arts sage assembly, is there still 3 years left?" 3 years was not a long time, but it was not a short time either. Faced with the opportunity of the ancient martial arts sage assembly, Xiaochen naturally would not give up. After bidding farewell to the Tianfeng saint, Xiaochen did not delay any further and left Tianfeng Xingzong on the same day. In less than a month's time, Xiaochen had experienced the greatest underestimation of his life. His thirst for strength made Xiaochen unwilling to waste any opportunity to grow. This trip to the Wind Plains was a great opportunity for him. Of course, whether or not he could grasp it depended on himself. Outside the transportation array in Tianfeng Xingzong, Xiaosheng slowly said, "Kid, this trip to the Wind Plains might be fruitful, but you might also die in a foreign land. It all depends on you. I will definitely come back alive, and I will definitely become the holy son of the ancient sacred state." Xiaosheng reminded Xiaochen of the dangers of this trip. Hearing this, Xiaochen replied with determination. Strength, what Xiaochen wanted now was strength. Gu Lingyao's departure, the strength of the Sacredine sect, and Yung Wan's arrogance were all like thorns stabbing into Xiaochen's heart. At the same time, they also spurred Xiaochen to continue moving forward. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 672. Just as Xiaochen was about to step into the teleportation array, a shout came from afar. "Xiaochen, wait a moment." Hearing the voice, Xiaochen turned around and saw Wang Fang and Wang Zong rushing toward him. They quickly arrived in front of Xiaochen. Looking at Xiaochen, Wang Fang wanted to say something but hesitated. After hesitating a few times, she finally mustered up the courage to ask, "Xiaochen, you will bring junior sister Lingyao back, right?" Wang Fang also knew about Gu Lingyao. Hearing this, Xiaochen took the lead and replied, "Of course." Hearing Xiaochen's reply, Wang Fang didn't know why, but she felt relieved. Wang Fang really treated Gu Lingyao as a good friend. Wang Fang didn't say anything else, but Wang Zong smiled and said, "Be careful when you go out to train." This time, Xiaochen only told the Tianfeng saint about his trip to the Wind Plains. To the outside world, he announced that he was going out to train. Hearing Wang Zong's reminder, Xiaochen nodded slightly and said, "Thank you." After saying that, Xiaochen walked into the teleportation matrix without hesitation. His figure soon disappeared. It wasn't troublesome to go to the Wind Plains from Tianfeng Xingzong. First, one would arrive at the Tianfeng Prefecture city, where there was a teleportation array that led to the Wind Plains. Of course, this teleportation array didn't lead directly to the Wind Plains, but to the Jinfeng city outside the Wind Plains. The Wind Plains was located in a different area for the Tianfeng Prefecture. According to its geographical location, the Wind Plains should belong to the Tianfeng Prefecture. However, because the Wind Plains was one of the 4 great death zones of the Tiana continent, it was directly managed by the ancient sacred sect. Because of this, the only city outside the branch monastery, Jinfeng City, had nothing to do with Tianfeng Xingzong. It was directly under the ancient sacred sect. For this reason, the ancient sacred sect had specially sent a saint to guard this place all year round. From this, it could be seen that the ancient sacred sect attached great importance to the Wind Plains. Perhaps it was because of the uniqueness of the Wind Plains and the opportunities that appeared frequently that even though the Wind Plains was dangerous, the wind-suppressing city was extremely lively and prosperous. The scale and prosperity of a city on the edge of the land of death was no less than that of the Tianfeng Prefecture city. This was indeed a shocking matter. However, after thinking about it for a moment, he understood. There were great opportunities and many precious treasures in the Wind Plains. Thus, many people would choose to come to the Wind Plains to train. In addition, this place was under the direct jurisdiction of the ancient sacred sect. Therefore, all the disciples of the other sacred sects in the ancient sacred region would come to the Wind Plains to train. Even the disciples of the ancient sacred sect could be seen in the wind-suppressing city from time to time. The Wind Plains was indeed a mysterious place that people yearned for. One side of it was located in the heavenly Wind Palace, while the other side was connected to the endless ocean. The entire Sky River continent was divided into 4 continents, and each continent could be said to be an independent continent separated by the endless sea. They were distributed around the Sky River continent. Therefore, the Wind Plains was not only located at the end of the heavenly Wind Palace, but also at the end of the ancient sacred region. Through the teleportation formation, Xiaochen quickly arrived at the Jinshan city. Looking at the bustling city with people coming and going, Xiaochen keenly discovered that the people in the Jinshan city were a mix of good and bad people. Not only were there local forces, but the disciples of the various sacred sects were also gathered here. When he was passing through the teleportation formation, Xiaochen knew that the teleportation formation in the Jinshan city was built at a great cost by the ancient sacred sect. It was connected to all the teleportation formations in the ancient sacred sect's territory. In other words, it was not only the heavenly Wind Palace that could be directly sent to the wind-suppressing city through the teleportation formation, but also from any other prefecture city in the ancient sacred region. Because of this convenience, the wind-suppressing city had become a gathering place for the disciples of the various sacred sects in the ancient sacred region. With so many disciples of the sacred sects gathered here, the Jinshan city naturally had its own characteristics. For example, institutions such as the gladiator arena and the exchange were extremely popular in the Jinshan city. It could be said that the Jinshan city was a place where good and bad people mixed together. However, in addition to the disciples of the various sacred sects, the Jinshan city also had its own local forces, known as the 3 great clans. It was said that the 3 great clans had existed since the city was built. There were many experts in the clans. Although there were no saints, there were many half-sages. Their numbers were probably not weaker than that of the Tianfengxing zone. After gradually understanding the situation of the wind-suppressing city, Xiaochen had to admit that the wind-suppressing city was indeed very different from what he had imagined. As he wandered on the streets, he thought about entering the Wind Plains. As Xiaochen, it was naturally better to enter the Wind Plains as early as possible. With this thought in mind, Xiaochen quickly decided that he would only rest in the wind-suppressing city for a day. He would leave for the Wind Plains the next day. After finding an inn and ordering some wine and dishes, Xiaochen drank alone silently. However, it should not be said that he was alone, because there was Xiaoxing beside him. However, the wine today was somewhat tasteless to Xiaochen. Every time he thought of that little girl Gulingyao, Xiaochen found it difficult to calm down. He did not know how that little girl was now. Was she in the Sacredine sect? Did the Sacredine sect hurt her? The more he thought about it, the harder it was to control the anger in his heart. However, he knew that he could not change anything right now. He did not have the qualifications to confront the Sacredine sect. After drinking the wine in his cup, Xiaochen secretly swore, "Just you wait. There will be a day when I will personally go to the Sacredine sect. In Yuan, you called me an ant. When the time comes, I will definitely let you see who is the real ant." With such a state of mind, Xiaochen did not cultivate. Accompanied by the wine, he finally fell into a deep sleep. After a silent night, early the next morning, when the sky had just brightened, Xiaochen checked out of the inn and walked towards the city gate. As soon as he left the inn, Xiaochen felt that the wind-suppressing city today was somewhat different. How should he put it? The wind-suppressing city today gave people a very oppressive feeling. The faces of the heavy people were somewhat heavy. They gathered in groups of 3 to 5 and whispered about something. Occasionally, they would even sigh. Although he did not know what was going on, Xiaochen did not pay too much attention to it. He walked all the way to the city gate of wind-suppressing city. However, here, Xiaochen received a reply that he was not allowed to leave the city. A group of 200 soldiers was responsible for guarding the city gate. The general leading them was a deacon of the ancient sacred sect. He had the cultivation of a half-saint. Hearing the words of the half-saint deacon, Xiaochen asked doubtfully, "Sir, may I ask why we are suddenly prohibited from leaving the city?" He was in a hurry to go to the Wind Plains. Now that he was not allowed to leave the city, what could he do? Faced with Xiao Chen's question, the deacon did not have any intention of making things difficult for him. He simply replied, "There are signs that the wind ghost in the Wind Plains may launch a large-scale attack on the city. Therefore, everyone is prohibited from leaving the city. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 673. The wind ghost in the Wind Plains was showing signs of a large-scale attack, so the entire wind-suppressing city was under martial law. Xiao Chen wasn't familiar with the wind ghost. Fortunately, he had Xiao Xing by his side. According to his explanation, Xiao Chen found out that the wind ghost was a special creature in the Wind Plains. It was similar to a wild beast. It had low intelligence and was even inferior to a monster. However, it was extremely ferocious. Moreover, the wind ghost wasn't afraid of the strong winds in the Wind Plains. It could be said that the Wind Plains was a land of death for humans, but it was the best home for the wind ghost. No one knew when the wind ghost appeared. It seemed that the wind ghost had already existed in the Wind Plains. It was also because of the existence of the wind ghost in the Wind Plains that the ancient sacred sect built the wind-suppressing city here. The purpose was to guard against the wind ghost's attacks. Every once in a while, the wind ghost would invade human territory. Their goal was very simple, and that was to devour humans. They loved human flesh and blood very much. In addition, they didn't have high intelligence. Therefore, the wind ghost could be said to be acting on instinct. In this way, it also created their ferocious nature. After telling Xiao Chen about the wind ghost in detail, after hearing Xiao Xing's explanation, Xiao Chen had no choice but to return to the city. Since there were signs that the wind ghost was about to launch a large-scale attack, Xiao Chen obviously couldn't leave the city at this time. Not to mention that the entire Xinshan city was under martial law. Even if it wasn't, Xiao Chen wouldn't leave the city rashly. One had to know that if one encountered the wind ghost in the wild, there was no chance of survival. Only by relying on the city could one have a chance of survival. Xiao Chen helplessly returned to Heavy City and found a restaurant. He drank while listening to the people around him talk about the wind ghost. Listening to the discussions of the surrounding people, Xiao Chen's understanding of the wind ghost slowly increased. Speaking of which, his luck was pretty good. He actually encountered a wind ghost as soon as he arrived in Wind Suppression City. According to the discussions of the surrounding people, the most recent wind ghost attack seemed to be 20 years ago. Of course, this was referring to large-scale wind ghost attacks. Small-scale wind ghost attacks naturally occurred from time to time, but they were harmless. The only thing that Suppressing Wind City was afraid of was large-scale wind ghost attacks. Every time a large-scale wind ghost attack broke out, it would be a tough battle for Suppressing Wind City. At that time, the number of wind ghosts would not be in the tens of thousands, but in the hundreds of thousands, millions, or even millions of wind ghosts. It was not impossible. It was said that the largest wind ghost attack in history was over 10 million wind ghosts. At that time, all the holy sons of the ancient sacred sect were mobilized, and even 3 Saint Venerable Elders were sent out. The rest of the deacons and disciples were even more numerous. Only then were they able to successfully withstand that attack. Alas, I hope this attack is not too terrifying. Otherwise, Mountain Suppression City will face another bloody battle. One of the 4 people sitting next to Xiao Chen sighed and said. Hearing this, another person also spoke out, "Yes, if the scale of this wind ghost attack is too large, I'm afraid the City Lord Mansion will have to issue the Ancient Sacred Order again." The Ancient Sacred Order was an order issued by the Ancient Sacred Sect during special times. Once it was issued, all the cultivators in the Ancient Sacred Sect must obey the order. Otherwise, they would be sentenced to death. Only during special times would the Ancient Sacred Order be issued. The Ancient Sacred Order was divided into 3 levels, from low to high. A Level 1 Ancient Sacred Order only needed 1 saint to sign it. A Level 2 Ancient Sacred Order required more than half of the saints in the Ancient Sacred Sect to sign it. As for the highest level, a level 3 ancient sacred order, it required all the saints in the ancient sacred sect to sign it. According to the level, it corresponded to the urgency of the situation. In any case, a level 3 ancient sacred order had never appeared since the establishment of the ancient sacred sect. This was because once a level 3 ancient sacred order was issued, it represented a moment of life and death. Level 3 and level 2 ancient sacred order were very rare. However, a level 1 ancient sacred order could only be issued a few times. Especially in Jinshan City. Every time a wind ghost attack of more than 1 million people broke out, the City Lord Mansion of Jinshan City would issue a level 1 ancient sacred order, ordering all the experts in the city to work together to deal with the wind ghost attack. There was no other way. The City Lord Mansion of Jinshan City had too many experts. Once they faced a large-scale wind ghost attack, it was obviously not enough. Therefore, they could only rely on the cultivators in the city. They prayed that the wind ghost attack this time would not be too terrifying. However, after hearing the words of these two, another person sitting together with them said with a smile, "I say, why are you guys so cowardly? The invasion of the Wind Fiend is a great opportunity for us. You should know that the Wind Fiend has quite a number of good items on him. When the time comes, we can sell them to the Ancient Saint Sect for a sum of spirit stones." Regarding the upcoming wind ghost attack, some people were excited, while some were afraid. Some people felt that the wind ghost attack was a good opportunity to make a fortune. After all, every time the Jinshan City resisted the wind ghost attack, the ancient sacred sect would reward the cultivators according to their merits. Those who fought bravely would receive a lot of rewards. At the same time, the corpse of the wind ghost you killed could be sold to the ancient sacred sect. In this way, after a wind ghost attack, the powerful cultivators would receive a great harvest. Xiaochen drank alone in the tavern and listened to the discussions of the people around him. Needless to say, Xiaochen had indeed heard a lot of useful information from them. The first was the wind ghost, and the second was the ancient sacred token. He had never heard of the ancient sacred token before, but after listening to the discussions of the people around him, Xiaochen gradually understood. It seems that we can only wait until the wind ghost attack ends before we can enter the wind plane. However, I don't know what the scale of the wind ghost attack will be. However, since the City Lord Mansion has ordered the whole city to be on alert, it seems that the scale of this attack will not be small. After drinking a mouthful of wine, Xiaochen secretly thought to himself. If it was only a small-scale wind ghost attack, the City Lord Mansion would obviously not be on alert. He could only wait and see in the city. However, the wind ghost attack this time was not all bad news for Xiaochen. This was because according to past experience, after every wind ghost attack, the wind plane would enter a short period of peace. At that time, the wind ghost in the wind plane would be very obedient. In this way, entering the wind plane during that period of time would naturally be much less dangerous than usual. In this way, when Xiaochen entered the wind plane at that time, he would not have to worry too much about the wind ghost attack. Just as Xiaochen was secretly thinking about his decision, the City Lord Mansion of the Jinshan City was shrouded in a tense atmosphere. In the hall of the City Lord Mansion, more than 10 people were sitting together. Everyone's expression was not very good. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 674. There were a total of 17 people sitting in a circle in the main hall of the City Lord's mansion. The person sitting on the main seat was a middle-aged man. He was tall and sturdy, had a square face, and looked somewhat ferocious. In addition, his expression was somewhat ugly, which made him look even more furious. The middle-aged man was called Saint Kuangli. He was the saint of the ancient saint sect who was in charge of guarding Jinshan City. As for the dozen people below him, they were all experts of the City Lord's mansion. Saint Kuangli's hoarse voice rang out as he glanced at the crowd below with his fist. According to the latest news, the scale of the wind ghost attack has reached at least 2 million. What do you think we should do? Everyone had gathered here because of the wind ghost's attack. This time, the scale of the wind ghost's attack wasn't small. Facing such a scale of wind ghosts' attack, suppressing Wind City obviously had to prepare countermeasures in advance. There were as many as 20,000 wind ghosts. This was a great pressure on Jinshan City. Moreover, who knew if the number of wind ghosts would continue to increase when they finally attacked? Everyone fell silent after hearing St. Kuang-li's words. After a long while, one of the people below St. Kuang-li spoke. Lord Sacred Master, let's activate the Ancient Saint token. The City Lord's mansion alone is not enough to deal with the wind ghost attack of this scale. He proposed to use the Ancient Saint token. After all, there were only so many people in the City Lord's mansion. It was impossible to resist the attack of more than 2 million wind ghosts. Therefore, they could only issue the Ancient Saint token and mobilize everyone in Jinshan City. Only then would they be able to repel the wind ghost attack. St. Kuang-li nodded slightly and said, "In my name, issue a level 1 Ancient Saint token. All cultivators in Jinshan City are to be at the disposal of the City Lord's mansion from now on." Soon, an Ancient Saint token was issued from the City Lord's mansion. Everyone who received the Ancient Saint token had different expressions. Some were worried, while others were excited. However, there was one thing that was the same. Once the Ancient Saint order was issued, everyone had to obey it. In other words, all the warriors in the wind-suppressing city had to obey the orders of the City Lord Mansion from now on. Otherwise, the City Lord Mansion had the right to kill them. After the Ancient Saint order was issued, the entire wind suppression city became noisy. Everyone knew that the scale of the wind ghost's attack this time would not be small. Otherwise, why would the City Lord Mansion issue the Ancient Saint order? Less than an hour after the Ancient Saint order was issued, the first order from the City Lord Mansion was issued. In Jinshan City, all practitioners whose cultivation had reached the Dao Querying Realm had to gather at a designated inn before nightfall. There would be deacons from the Ancient Saint sect who would arrange accommodations for everyone. All the martial artists above the Dao Querying Realm were gathered. As for martial artists below the Dao Querying Realm, they had nothing to do with them. In the face of the wind ghost's attack, martial artists below the Dao Querying Realm were almost useless. They only had one task, which was to take care of the logistics. As for the battlefield, they were not qualified to participate. Like the others, after receiving the order, Xiaochen also came to one of the inns designated by the City Lord Mansion. This inn had been requisitioned by the City Lord Mansion and was specially provided for Dao Querying Realm martial artists and above to stay. When Xiaochen stepped into the hall on the first floor of the inn, a soldier from the City Lord Mansion took the initiative to welcome him. "Friend, please register here." Everyone who came to the inn had to register. Of course, it was very simple. It was nothing more than name, cultivation, and the faction that they belonged to. After the simple registration, the soldier from before led Xiaochen to his residence. As there were too many people, it was naturally impossible to arrange for each person to have a room. In the room that was arranged for Xiaochen, there were already 3 other people. Their cultivation was the same as Xiaochen's, which was the Dao Querying Realm. It was obvious that the City Lord's Mansion differentiated the cultivators with different cultivation levels. Furthermore, according to their cultivation levels, they were treated differently. For example, Dao Querying Realm martial artists had 4 people to a room. Dao Querying Realm martial artists had 8 people to a room. Dao Gate Realm and Dao Transformation Realm martial artists had 2 people to a room. Dao King Realm, Dao Emperor Realm, and Half Saints had 1 room each. The higher the cultivation, the better the treatment. Xiaochen didn't have any objections to this. Moreover, the soldier even explained in a courteous manner. "Brother Xiaochen, because there are too many people, we can only put up with it for now. But don't worry, my City Lord's estate will provide for all your needs during this period of time. Once we've repelled the wind ghost, my City Lord's estate will compensate you accordingly. I hope Brother Xiao can be understanding." In order to unite everyone's strength to resist the wind ghost's attack, the City Lord's Mansion naturally wouldn't be stingy. Not only would they be responsible for everyone's living and cultivation needs, they would even provide compensation when the time came. Xiaochen nodded with a smile when he heard the soldier. Xiaochen didn't object to the actions of the city lord's estate at all. Even though the environment was a little harsh and 4 people to a room, it couldn't be helped. It was an extraordinary period. After exchanging some pleasantries with the soldier left while Xiaochen strode into the room. At this moment, everything else in the room had been moved away. Only 4 futons were left in the corner of the room. After nodding to the other 3, Xiaochen went to the only empty futon and sat down cross-legged. Before the wind ghost's attack broke out, everyone didn't need to do anything. They just needed to cultivate in peace. In just a day, all the cultivators at the Dao Quarrying Realm and above in the entire Xinshan city had been gathered by the city lord's estate. They were distributed in 90 inns. After counting, the number of people had exceeded 300,000. 300,000 people was indeed a large number. However, compared to the 2 million wind ghost, it was nothing. Moreover, more than half of the 300,000 people were at the Dao Quarrying Realm and Dao Validation Realm. There were more than 200,000 people, followed by 70,000 Dao Gate Realm and Dao Transformation Realm cultivators. As for Dao King Realm and Dao Transformation Realm cultivators, there were less than 20,000. As for half-saints, there wasn't a single one. Just as the city lord's estate was nervously preparing to deal with the wind ghost's attack, a piece of information that made St. Kuang Li's expression change drastically came back. Previously, they had sent a half-saint deacon of the ancient sacred sect to check the situation in the periphery of the wind plane. Now that the news had come back, even St. Kuang Li's expression darkened. A trace of disbelief flashed through his eyes. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. End of chapter. Chapter 675. St. Kuang Li's face turned gloomy when he saw the latest news about the wind ghost attack. Noticing the change in St. Kuang Li's expression, the other half-saint deacons beside him asked curiously, "Sir Saint, what happened? Take a look for yourselves." St. Kuang Li passed the information to everyone. With a single glance, the expressions of the half-saint deacons of the ancient sacred sect changed drastically. Some of them couldn't help but cry out in alarm. How is this possible? In fact, the content of the information was very simple. It said that the wind ghost didn't show any signs of attacking. They were just biding their time in the periphery of the wind plane, near Wind Suppression City. However, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that the wind ghost didn't choose to attack. Their purpose was to wait for other wind ghosts to arrive. In other words, there were already 2 million wind ghosts attacking, but now it seemed impossible because the number of wind ghosts was still increasing. In less than a day, the number of wind ghosts had increased from 2 million to 3 million. And it seemed that this was far from the end. There were still wind ghosts coming from the depths of the wind plane. At the same time, the number of wind ghosts was shocking, but what worried St. Kuang Li even more was that there were more than one wind ghost king, which was comparable to a half-saint expert. Now, there were 12 of them. Wind ghosts didn't have a specific strength classification. Wind ghosts below the half-saint level were collectively called wind ghosts. Only those whose strength reached the half-saint level were called wind ghost kings. Wind ghosts comparable to human saints were called wind ghost saint kings. Now, there were 12 wind ghost kings in the group of wind ghosts. To be called wind ghost kings, they were not only much stronger than ordinary wind ghosts, they were comparable to human half-saints. At the same time, the wind ghost kings had a qualitative leap in intelligence compared to ordinary wind ghosts. Although they weren't as intelligent as humans, they were comparable to low-level demon beasts. How is this possible? There are 12 wind ghost kings. What do these wind ghosts want to do? A half-saint deacon of the ancient sacred sect said in shock. He couldn't help but look at St. Kuang Li. At this moment, St. Kuang Li had become the pillar of the entire Wind Suppression City. Facing everyone's gaze, St. Kuang Li sighed softly and said, "It seems that the wind ghost attack this time is much more serious than we thought. Perhaps the scale is not inferior to the one 20 years ago. Your Holiness, 20 years ago, the number of wind ghosts numbered in the tens of millions. Is that even possible?" Moreover, we still haven't found the Wind Ghost Saint King, said one of the half-saint deacons after hearing Saint Kuang-li's words. A Wind Ghost Holy King was a wind ghost comparable to a saint. They were the strongest in the Wind Plains. In the entire Wind Ghost race, there weren't many Wind Ghost Holy Kings. Not only were Wind Ghost Holy Kings powerful, but their intelligence wasn't inferior to that of humans. For this reason, the large-scale Wind Ghost attacks in history were all backed by Holy Kings. Therefore, once a Wind Ghost Holy King appeared, it meant that this Wind Ghost attack couldn't be underestimated. According to the current intelligence, there wasn't any sign of a Wind Ghost Holy King among the Wind Ghost horde. But Saint Kuang-li sneered. Humph. The intelligence of those beasts isn't inferior to that of humans. They are extremely cunning. Even though we haven't encountered them yet, I'm sure that there's a Wind Ghost Holy King hiding nearby, waiting to deal a fatal blow to our Wind Suppression City. Saint Kuang-li knew a lot about Wind Ghost Holy Kings. These beasts couldn't be viewed as ordinary wind ghosts anymore. Hearing Saint Kuang-li's words, the half-saint deacons looked at each other and asked in a heavy tone, "Then what should we do? If a Wind Ghost Holy King is behind this, I'm afraid Wind Suppression City's strength alone isn't enough." They thought that as long as they gathered the strength of Wind Suppression City, they would be able to stop the Wind Ghost's attack. But now, it seemed that even if they gathered all the cultivators in Wind Suppression City, it wouldn't be enough to deal with the Wind Ghost's attack. Saint Kuang-li said coldly in the face of the half-saint deacon's worries. Wind Suppression City alone won't be able to stop the Wind Ghost's attack. Therefore, I've decided to raise the level of the Ancient Saint token to level 2. Saint Kuang-li had just issued a Grade 1 Ancient Sage order this morning, but in less than a day, he was going to raise it to Grade 2. Hearing this, the deacon's expressions changed slightly. However, one of them soon thought of something. But Lord Sacred Master, this level 2 Ancient Saint token requires the approval of more than half of the Sacred Masters to take effect. Of course I know. I've already sent a message back to the sect. I'm sure there will be a reply soon. Saint Kuang-li said. The issuance of a level 2 Ancient Saint token required the approval of more than half of the saints in the Ancient Saint sect. It was important to note that the above-mentioned half-saints included Tianfeng Saint, Tianyue Saint, and the others. In other words, all the saints in the Ancient Saint state had the right to make decisions. Only by obtaining the agreement of more than half saints among the saints could a level 2 Ancient Saint order take effect and be carried out. Just as Saint Kuang-li finished speaking, an invisible wave came from the heaven stage. This wave could only be sensed by saints. Saint Kuang-li smiled faintly. The Ancient Saint sect's summons. The appearance of this wave was the Ancient Saint sect's signal for all the saints to gather for a meeting. Saint Kuang-li then went to a secret room in the backyard of the city lord's mansion. There was a talisman array here. The collateral family members sat in the center of the array. Saint Kuang-li then closed his eyes. At the same time, in the center of the distant Ancient Saint state, there was a vast plain. In the middle of the plain, there was a long stretch of buildings arranged in an orderly manner. This was where the Ancient Saint sect was located. In the center of the entire complex, there was a simple and majestic hall. In the circular hall, there were more than 10 futons arranged in an orderly manner. At this moment, more than half of the futons were occupied by saints with different expressions. However, the figures of these saints were somewhat illusory. With a single glance, one could tell that these illusory figures were merely projections of these saints. Just like Saint Kuang-li, these saints from different parts of the Ancient Saint state were gathered together through the power of the talisman array. Please collect, vote, recommend. End of chapter. Chapter 676. The images of the saints were projected into the hall one after another. In just a short time, the originally empty hall was filled with more than a dozen praying mats that formed a circle. Everyone present was a saint of the ancient sacred sect. Each of them was an existence that could make the ancient sacred state and even the Tiana continent tremble with a stomp of their feet. At this time, these saints had gathered together, and one of them took the initiative to speak. Hey, It's just a wind ghost riot. There's no need to make such a big commotion. What are you planning to do by gathering all of us here? Are you going to slaughter the Wind Ghost clan? The saint's tone was very relaxed, as if he wasn't worried about the Wind Ghost attack at all. Hearing his words, Saint Qingju also spoke with a smile on his face. It's been a long time since we've gathered together. However, we can't be careless about the Wind Ghost's attack. Let Kuangli do the talking. He should know best. Saint Qingju looked at Saint Kuangli. This information was sent back by Saint Kuangli. Obviously, he had the most right to speak among all the saints present. Hearing Saint Qingju's words, Saint Kuangli didn't speak nonsense and immediately spoke in a deep voice. According to the current information, it can be concluded that the Wind Ghost attack is definitely controlled by the Wind Ghost Saint King behind the scenes. Although the scale of the attack can't be determined for the time being, I think everyone hasn't forgotten what happened 20 years ago, right? The Wind Ghost attack 20 years ago was also the largest Wind Ghost attack in history. At that time, because the ancient sacred sect didn't respond in time, the wind-suppressing city was directly breached. Almost all the cultivators in the city were killed or injured. The entire wind-suppressing city was completely swept by the Wind Ghost and almost turned into a ghost town. In the end, only less than 1,000 people survived in the entire wind-suppressing city. The rest were all slaughtered by the Wind Ghost. The Wind Ghost's attack could be said to be deeply engraved in their hearts, and it was exactly because of that all the saints present here fell silent when they heard Saint Kuangli's words, and then one of them spoke in a low voice. Kuangli's words make sense. We can't afford to be careless with the Wind Ghost's attack. Since there are signs that the Wind Ghost Holy King is behind this attack, I think we should just activate the Level 2 Ancient Saint token. The saint suggested to activate the Grade 2 Ancient Saint token. However, there were naturally some who objected to it. Another saint said indifferently. Second grade Ancient Saint token? Was it necessary? You're making a mountain out of a molehill. I don't think so. Since we've already guessed it, it's only natural that we take precautions. I'm in favor of activating the Grade 2 Ancient Sage token. I agree too. The saints spoke one after another. In the end, after most of them expressed their opinions, the saints voted. The result was that more than half of the saints agreed to activate the second grade Ancient Saint token. Seeing this, the saint in the middle, who was also the current sect leader of the Ancient Saint sect, Saint Gumu, spoke up. Half of the votes pass. Activate the second grade Ancient Saint token. With more than half of the saints agreeing to activate the second grade Ancient Saint token, the matter could be considered to have come to an end. However, Saint Qingju said afterward. Since the second grade Ancient Saint token has been activated, I'm afraid there will be more people in wind-suppressing city. Kuangli alone won't be enough. Who knows how many Wind Ghost Holy Kings will appear? Hearing Saint Qingju's words, the saints naturally had no objections. Since the second grade Ancient Saint token had been activated, wind-suppressing city naturally couldn't only have Saint Kuangli as the sole overseer. In this way, they would choose from the saints who agreed to activate the second grade Ancient Saint token to see who would be willing to go to wind-suppressing city to deal with the Wind Ghost attack. In the end, Saint Qingju was the first to express his willingness to go to wind-suppressing city. Following that, 3 other saints were willing to go to wind-suppressing city. In this way, there were 5 saints in wind-suppressing city. At the same time, the various saint sects would also send their elders, deacons, and disciples to wind-suppressing city. According to the rules, after activating the second grade Ancient Saint token, each saint sect would have to send at least 1 personal disciple, 10 core disciples, and no less than 1,000 ordinary disciples, deacons, and elders. At the same time, the Ancient Saint sect would have to send at least 1 saint. The second grade Ancient Saint token had a hard and fast rule. As such, the various saints present naturally sent their disciples to wind-suppressing city. However, the curious thing was that after the Heavenly Wind Saint sent out his core disciples and ordinary disciples, he did not mention sending the direct disciple of the Heavenly Wind Saint sect. Saint Gumu asked curiously. Tianfeng, didn't Tianfeng Xingzong send a personal disciple to wine-suppressing city? Tianfeng Xingzong already has a personal disciple in wind-suppressing city. There's no need to send another one, Saint Tianfeng said indifferently. Xiaochen was in wind-suppressing city now. In this way, Saint Tianfeng naturally didn't need to send another personal disciple. Hearing this, the saints were slightly stunned, but they didn't say anything. Since there was already a personal disciple in wind-suppressing city, then there was no problem. After settling these matters, all the saints left one after another. Very soon, the grand hall became empty again. It looked cold and desolate, forming a sharp contrast with the gathering of saints earlier. After a discussion, the next day, the wind-suppressing city governor's mansion issued the second great ancient saint token. Once this news came out, it immediately caused a huge uproar in wind-suppressing city. The second great ancient saint token meant that the situation was very serious. In an instant, the warriors in wind-suppressing city guessed that the scale of the wind ghost attack this time would be extremely terrifying. It might not be any weaker than the one 20 years ago. Otherwise, why would the ancient saint sect issue the second great ancient saint token? The atmosphere in wind-suppressing city became more and more tense after the second great ancient saint token was issued. A somber and heavy aura continued to spread in wind-suppressing city. At the same time, as time passed, the various saint sects in the ancient saint state all sent their disciples to wind-suppressing city. In an instant, the transportation array in wind-suppressing city was completely busy. There was almost no time to rest. Groups of disciples from different saint sects continuously walked out of the transportation array. At first, it was the ordinary disciples. Then, it was the deacons and elders of the various saint sects, followed by the core disciples. In the end, the personal disciples of the various saint sects also arrived one after another. 2 days passed in a row. One morning, Xiaochen, who was cultivating in his room, heard the excited voices of people outside his room. Have you heard? The personal disciples of the various saint sects have arrived. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 677. After the arrival of the core disciples of each sect, the pro-disciples also arrived one after another. Along with the voices outside the room, the other 3 people who shared the room with Xiaochen also stood up one after another. In 2 days, the 4 of them had lived under the same roof, so everyone could be considered to be familiar with each other. When the 3 saw that Xiaochen was still indifferent, one of them asked curiously, "Xiaochen, aren't you going to welcome the pro-disciples of Tianfeng Xingzong? Also, I heard that because of the issuance of the second great ancient saint order and the arrival of the pro-disciples of each sect, everyone's living quarters will also be redistributed in the future. It is said that everyone will be allocated according to their respective sections." The pro-disciples of each sect had arrived one after another, and everyone's living quarters would also be redistributed. Previously, everyone was allocated according to their cultivation. No matter which sect they came from, as long as their cultivation was at the same level, they would be allocated together. Just like the room that Xiaochen and the other 3 were currently staying in, the 4 of them were from different sections. Now, with the arrival of the experts and pro-disciples of each sect, the city lord mansion would also allocate the disciples of each sect to one place. Just like the inn that Xiaochen was staying in now, there were a total of more than 20 courtyards here. After the redistribution, each courtyard would be allocated to a disciple of a sect. In this way, people of the same sect could live together, and in this way, there would be less trouble. After all, when the people of each sect gathered together, it was inevitable that there would be conflicts on a daily basis. Going to welcome the pro-disciples of Tianfeng Xingzong. Hearing this, Xiaochen couldn't help but laugh. Yesterday, the Tianfeng saint had told Xiaochen through the sound-transmitting charm that Tianfeng Xingzong wouldn't send any other pro-disciples this time because he was in Jinfeng City. And this time, everything in Jinfeng City would be decided by Xiaochen. Since he already knew that he was the pro-disciple of Tianfeng Xingzong, Xiaochen naturally didn't need to welcome anyone. However, now that the living quarters had to be redistributed, Xiaochen naturally had to go to Tian Fengxingzong's residence to meet everyone. Smiling slightly, Xiaochen said faintly, "You're right, but I don't need to welcome the pro-disciples of Tian Fengxingzong. I'll go directly to their residence to meet them." After saying that, Xiaochen stood up. Hearing this, the other three had a helpless look on their faces. Xiaochen, this guy was really arrogant. He didn't even put the pro-disciples of his sect in his eyes. Naturally, the three of them didn't know that Xiaochen was the pro-disciple of Tian Fengxingzong. They shook their heads helplessly and prepared to go to the transmission array to welcome the pro-disciples of each sect. However, before they left, the disciple of Tianyua sacred sect took the initiative to invite them. "Xiaochen, Tian Fengxingzong and Tianyua sacred sect's residences have been arranged together. Let's go together." The residences of Tianyua sacred sect and Tian Fengxingzong were arranged to be in the same inn. Moreover, they were two small courtyards adjacent to each other. Therefore, in the face of this Tian Fengxingzong's disciple's invitation, Xiaochen didn't refuse. He nodded slightly, and then the two of them walked out of the room together. This disciple of Tianyua sacred sect was just an ordinary disciple. The two of them walked out of the inn together, but he wanted to go to the transmission array to welcome the pro-disciples of Tianyua sacred sect. He invited Xiaochen to go with him. After thinking about it for a while, he decided that it was on the way as well. Therefore, Xiaochen did not refuse. As the people of the various sacred sects continuously poured into Jinfeng City, the streets of the entire Jinfeng City were bustling with noise. Disciples of different sects gathered in groups of 3 to 5 and were discussing something in low voices. On the way to Jinfeng City's transmission array, there was already a sea of people here. From time to time, there would be pro-disciples of the various sacred sects walking out. Every time a pro-disciple of their own sect appeared, the disciples of the various sects who were already waiting here would hastily go up to welcome them. In the crowd, Xiaochen found the Tianyua sacred sect's people. He quickly went up and followed behind this Tianyua sacred sect's disciple. However, in the Tianyua sacred sect's crowd, Xiaochen saw a familiar voice. It was Gumu. Originally, Xiaochen didn't plan to go up, but since he saw Gumu, he naturally had to go up and greet him. "Gumu!" he softly called out. Hearing Xiaochen's voice, Gumu looked over. When he saw that the person who came was Xiaochen, Gumu's face immediately showed a smile. He quickly went up and greeted him. "Xiaochen, I didn't expect you to come here too." The last time he met Gumu was during the sacred sect selection in Tian Fengxingzong. Because the timing wasn't right, the two of them didn't have a chance to have a good chat. Now that they met again, they naturally had a lot to talk about. Seeing that Gumu was wearing the Tianyua sacred sect's core disciple uniform and had the word 1 in front of his chest, it meant that Gumu was now the number 1 core disciple of Tianyua sacred sect. Regarding Gumu being able to become the number 1 core disciple of Tianyua sacred sect, Xiaochen was extremely happy. He smiled and said, "Brat, you're not bad. You've already become the number 1 core disciple of Tianyua sacred sect. I was just lucky. However, what about you? You're definitely a core disciple. With your abnormal strength, how could you be worse than me?" Hearing Xiaochen's words, Gumu also smiled and replied. Because Xiaochen wasn't wearing the Tian Fengxingzong disciple uniform, let alone the Tian Feng robe, Gumu didn't know what status Xiaochen had in Tian Fengxingzong. However, thinking about it, it definitely wouldn't be worse than him. The two of them happily chatted. Just as the two of them were talking, an extremely untimely voice rang out. "Yo, isn't this Tian Fengxingzong's genius? What? Have you come to Jinfeng City to die?" Hearing this voice full of sarcasm, Xiaochen and Gumu both looked over. With a glance, Xiaochen saw an old acquaintance walking over. This person was Zhang Mingfeng. Back then, during the Tian Fengxingzong selection, Xiaochen and Zhang Mingfeng had a battle. In that battle, he defeated Zhang Mingfeng. He didn't expect that this time, he would also come. Facing Xiaochen's gaze, Zhang Mingfeng's eyes had a thick trace of hatred. Ever since he was young, Zhang Mingfeng had always boasted of being a genius. However, after entering Tianyua's sacred sect, Zhang Mingfeng was disappointed. This was because Gu Mu, who was in the same batch as him, had steadily surpassed him in all aspects. Until now, Gu Mu was already the #1 core disciple, while he, Zhang Mingfeng, was merely ranked 12th within the core disciples. His status was far inferior to Gu Mu, so Zhang Mingfeng naturally held a grudge. Adding on the fact that Gu Mu and Xiaochen were old acquaintances, and Xiaochen had once defeated him in front of everyone, Zhang Mingfeng naturally held a grudge against Xiaochen as well. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 678. Xiaochen could see the dense hatred in Zhang Mingfeng's eyes with a single glance. However, he didn't take it to heart. Previously, Zhang Mingfeng could still be considered a strong opponent, but now, Xiaochen didn't even put him in his eyes. Xiaochen only glanced at him indifferently before retracting his gaze. He didn't even have the intention to pay attention to him. Being completely ignored by Xiaochen, the hatred in Zhang Mingfeng's eyes was even more monstrous. He strode in front of Xiaochen and said coldly, "Xiaochen, do you want to die?" Being ignored by Xiaochen, Zhang Mingfeng was furious. He felt as if in Xiaochen's eyes, he was just an ant that liked to jump around. His heart was burning with anger. In response, Xiaochen said indifferently, "I'm not interested in you. Don't bother me again." It was rare for him to meet Gu Mu, so Xiaochen naturally didn't want a fly flying around his ear. However, after hearing Xiaochen's words, Zhang Mingfeng was even more furious. Unable to hold back the anger in his heart, Zhang Mingfeng roared angrily and immediately threw out a punch, aiming directly at Xiaochen's face. "Xiaochen, you're courting death." Zhang Mingfeng directly chose to attack. In response, a cold glint flashed in Xiaochen's eyes. Immediately, Xiaochen swung out his palm as if he was swatting a fly. Zhang Mingfeng's attack was directly broken. At the same time, Xiaochen's palm fiercely landed on Zhang Mingfeng's face. Without any ability to resist, Zhang Mingfeng was directly sent flying by Xiaochen's slap. What a joke! Although Xiaochen hadn't been in Tianfeng Zone for too long, his improvement was extremely huge. How could Zhang Mingfeng be compared to Xiaochen now? In front of Xiaochen, he didn't even have the slightest ability to fight back. Seeing this, even Gu Mu on the side was stunned. Clearly, he didn't think that Xiaochen's strength was already this strong. After the shock, Gu Mu helplessly shook his head and bitterly laughed. In his heart, he secretly thought that it was probably impossible to catch up to Xiaochen. Being able to control himself and not being shaken off was already not easy. After casually getting rid of Zhang Mingfeng, this annoying fly, Xiaochen planned on continuing to talk with Gu Mu. However, at this moment, another person walked out of the teleportation array. Following this person's appearance, the disciples of Tianyua's sacred sect all excitedly went up to greet him. The person who came was wearing the Tianyua sacred robe. Clearly, he was a direct disciple of Tianyua's sacred sect. Regarding the direct disciples of Tianyua's sacred sect, Xiaochen only knew Su Tianzi. However, unfortunately, the person who came to wine-suppressing city this time clearly wasn't Su Tianzi, but someone called Lu Tianming. From Gu Mu's mouth, Xiaochen also knew that this Lu Tianming was ranked 10th among the 10 great direct disciples of Tianyua's sacred sect. With just a glance, Xiaochen withdrew his gaze. Clearly, he wasn't too interested in Lu Tianming. After experiencing the matter of Sacredine sect, Xiaochen's gaze was no longer limited to direct disciples. In Xiaochen's heart, the ancient sacred sect's holy son was his goal. Because only then would he have the ability to directly face Sacredine sect and rescue Gu Lingyao. Walking out of the teleportation array like a moon surrounded by stars, Lu Tianming walked over with large strides under the escort of a group of Tianyua sacred sect disciples. However, when he saw Zhang Mingfeng lying on the ground like a dead dog, Lu Tianming slightly frowned and said, "Junior Zhang, what happened to you?" This Zhang Mingfeng just happened to be one of Lu Tianming's lackeys. Therefore, when he saw Zhang Mingfeng being beaten up, Lu Tianming naturally felt displeased in his heart. Hearing Lu Tianming's question, Zhang Mingfeng immediately began to complain tearfully. From his mouth, Xiaochen had become a vile person who used his power to bully others and sneak attack from the shadows. According to what Zhang Mingfeng said, Xiaochen and himself had some enmity in the past. Originally, he didn't want to cause any trouble when they met this time. However, who would have thought that Xiaochen would suddenly sneak attack him? Because he was caught off guard, he was successfully ambushed by Xiaochen. Zhang Mingfeng didn't intentionally hide his voice, so his words were naturally heard by Xiaochen and Gumu. However, Xiaochen couldn't even be bothered to explain. Even Gumu, who was at the side, wanted to speak, but was stopped by Xiaochen. From Xiaochen's point of view, for someone like Zhang Mingfeng, no matter how much you explained to him, it would be like playing the lute to a cow. Moreover, was a mere Lu Tianming worth him explaining? Let him think what he wanted. Under Zhang Mingfeng's false accusation, Lu Tianming's gaze quickly landed on Xiaochen. Seeing this, Zhang Mingfeng's eyes flashed with a hint of complacency as he thought to himself. Xiaochen, let's see if you can still survive this time. Senior brother Lu is a direct disciple. In a while, I'll definitely let senior brother Lu beat you up until you have to look for your teeth on the ground. Facing Lu Tianming's gaze, Gumu's face was a bit ugly. Although he was the #1 core disciple of the Tianyue sacred sect, he wasn't Lu Tianming's opponent. Now that Lu Tianming clearly believed Zhang Mingfeng's words, Gumu started to worry in his heart. On the contrary, Xiaochen, facing Lu Tianming's gaze, didn't have the slightest change of expression. He indifferently looked back at him. Even when Lu Tianming stepped in front of him, Xiaochen's expression still didn't change. The two people's gazes met, and the disciples of the Tianyue sacred sect all came over. Even the surrounding disciples of the other sects all had curious expressions as they looked over. The atmosphere became more and more tense. At this time, Gumu said to Lu Tianming, "Senior brother Lu, this matter isn't Zhang." Gumu wanted to explain a few words for Xiaochen, but before he could finish, he was directly interrupted by Lu Tianming. "You don't have the right to speak here." He didn't give Gumu any face. Facing this, a trace of coldness flashed through Gumu's eyes. In reality, the difference in strength between him and Lu Tianming wasn't that big. Gumu firmly believed that as long as he was given a bit more time, he would definitely be able to defeat Lu Tianming, kick him off the altar, and become a direct disciple. However, right now, he still wasn't Lu Tianming's opponent. Seeing Gumu being scolded by Lu Tianming, the coldness in Xiaochen's eyes slowly intensified. However, Lu Tianming acted as if he didn't see this at all. With a condescending attitude, he questioned Xiaochen. "You're a disciple of Tianfeng Xingzong? How arrogant! You actually dared to sneak attack a disciple of my Tianyue sacred sect." "Humph, who is the direct disciple of Tianfeng Xingzong? Tell him to come out. I want to see if he'll give me, Lu Tianming, an explanation." Lu Tianming didn't know Xiaochen's identity at all. The moment he opened his mouth, he wanted the direct disciple of Tianfeng Xingzong to come out and give him an explanation. It felt as if he was saying that Xiaochen wasn't worthy to speak to him. Facing the overbearing Lu Tianming, just when everyone thought that Xiaochen would definitely lower his head and admit his mistake, an unexpected sentence came out of Xiaochen's mouth. "Who do you think you are? Give you an explanation? You're worthy." When these words came out, Lu Tianming was stunned. The surrounding Tianyue sacred sect disciples were also stunned. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 679. Xiaochen's words caused the expressions of the surrounding disciples to change greatly. Lu Tianming was even more furious. He never thought that Xiaochen would dare to speak to him in such a tone. After all, he was a direct disciple. His eyes flashed with anger, and he laughed out loud. Lu Tianming immediately laughed and said, "Ha, good, what a reckless brat. I originally wanted to leave some face for your Tianfeng Xingzong's direct disciple, but now it seems that there is no need for that. As he spoke, a terrifying aura erupted from Lu Tianming's body. As soon as this aura appeared, everyone present involuntarily retreated. For a moment, only Xiaochen and Gumu were left in front of Lu Tianming. Looking straight at Lu Tianming and facing his oppressive aura, Xiaochen did not change his expression at all. A mere Lu Tianming was not worthy of Xiaochen's attention. Their gazes collided. Then, under everyone's gaze, Lu Tianming made his move. He directly struck out with his palm, and a terrifying aura instantly enveloped Xiaochen. Seeing Lu Tianming make his move, the surrounding disciples had different expressions as they whispered in low voices. Who is this person? He actually dares to go against a direct disciple. He's dead for sure. I heard that he is a disciple of Tianfeng Xingzong. He really doesn't know what's good for him. Tianfeng Xingzong. Interesting. I wonder who will be the direct disciple of Tianfeng Xingzong this time. However, it seems that this brat is going to lose face today. Everyone discussed in low voices. From their words, it was clear that most of them felt that Xiaochen was dead for sure. After all, in the Tiana continent, provoking a direct disciple was not something that anyone knew. While everyone was discussing in low voices, Lu Tianming's attack arrived as expected. However, the scene that everyone had imagined did not occur. Facing Lu Tianming's attack, Xiaochen did not dodge. Instead, he directly threw out a punch. For a moment, the fist and palm collided. With a muffled bang, a strong wind blew and the ground began to crack. At the same time, the auras of the two people were equally matched. Xiaochen wasn't defeated by Lu Tianming's palm strike. On the contrary, he actually blocked Lu Tianming's congratulation head-on. Although Lu Tianming didn't use any martial skills, neither did Xiaochen. He had used the same casual attack to block Lu Tianming's palm. Faced with such an outcome, many of the disciples present were unable to remain calm. Especially those disciples of Tianyua's sacred sect, each and every one of them looked as if they had seen a ghost. Their faces were filled with disbelief. Lu Tianming was a direct disciple of the Tianyua sacred sect. Thus, how could Xiaochen block Lu Tianming's attack? Even Gumu, who was standing behind Xiaochen, had a face full of shock. He guessed that Xiaochen's strength must have improved a lot, but he never thought that Xiaochen's strength was actually comparable to Lu Tianming's. Everyone was shocked. However, this was just the beginning. Was Xiaochen on par with Lu Tianming? It might have been before, but now, Xiaochen's strength was clearly superior to Lu Tianming's. As the 10th direct disciple of the Tianyua sacred sect, Lu Tianming's strength was indeed stronger than Yichushuan's in the past. However, he wasn't as strong as Yuqing. Now, Xiaochen's strength was actually between Baizhong and Yuqing. In other words, Xiaochen was slightly stronger than Lu Tianming. During the confrontation, Xiaochen didn't care about Lu Tianming's extremely ugly expression. He increased the strength in his hand once again. In an instant, Lu Tianming was directly pushed back a few steps by Xiaochen. He stumbled back 5 steps. This result made everyone's eyes almost pop out of their sockets. It was already hard for them to accept that Xiaochen could block Lu Tianming's attack. But now, not only did Xiaochen block Lu Tianming's attack, but he also forced Lu Tianming to retreat. In other words, Xiaochen had the upper hand in the confrontation just now. He actually forced a direct disciple to retreat. Many disciples stared blankly at Xiaochen and couldn't help but exclaim. Compared to the shock of the others, Lu Tianming, as the person involved, felt as though he was struck by lightning. He was a direct disciple, but now, he was forced to retreat by this guy in front of him. Lu Tianming stared at Xiaochen. From the collision just now, he clearly felt how terrifying Xiaochen's strength was. His expression turned ugly as he said in an ice-cold tone. Who exactly are you? Lu Tianming originally thought that Xiaochen was only a core disciple of the Tianfeng Xingzong. But now, it seemed that he wasn't. How could a core disciple have such strength? That was impossible. Facing Lu Tianming's question, however, before Xiaochen could reply, a group of Tian Fengxing's own disciples strode over. The leader was a core disciple. Previously, everyone went to the inn to look for Xiaochen, but they didn't find him. When they were about to return, they were attracted by the noise here. Who would have thought that when the Tian Fengxing's own disciples passed through the crowd, they would see the scene of Xiaochen forcing Lu Tianming to retreat? They finally found Xiaochen. The Tian Fengxing's own disciples were delighted. They quickly stepped forward and respectfully saluted Xiaochen. "Senior Xiaochen. Look, it's the Tian Fengxing's own people." Seeing the Tian Fengxing's own disciples appear, many people looked at the scene in front of them curiously. They also wanted to know who Xiaochen was. Xiaochen nodded slightly to the crowd. Then, he looked at Lu Tianming again and said calmly, "Didn't you want the direct disciple of Tian Fengxing's own to give you an explanation? I am him. Tell me, what explanation do you want?" Hearing this, Lu Tianming was stunned. Xiaochen's meaning was very clear. He was the direct disciple representing Tian Fengxing's own. Lu Tianming fixed his gaze on Xiaochen. Xiaochen was the direct disciple of Tian Fengxing's own. However, Lu Tianming had never heard of Xiaochen among the top 10 direct disciples of Tian Fengxing's own. He had never seen Xiaochen before. However, at this time, the Tian Fengxing's own disciple beside Xiaochen also spoke. "Senior Xiaochen is the 10th direct disciple of Tian Fengxing's own." The Tian Fengxing's own disciples proved Xiaochen's identity. Lu Tianming and the Tianyue sacred sect disciples' faces were very ugly. Lu Tianming snorted coldly and said fiercely, "Well, I will remember today's matter. Xiaochen, let's wait and see." He didn't expect that Xiaochen was really the direct disciple of Tian Fengxing's own. So, what could Lu Tianming say? They were all direct disciples. Xiaochen obviously wouldn't be afraid of him. As soon as his voice fell, Lu Tianming turned around and left with the Tianyue sacred sect disciples without waiting for Xiaochen's reply. However, at this time, the Tianyue sacred sect disciples had mixed feelings in their hearts, especially Zhang Mingfeng. He looked as if he had eaten a fly. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 680. Damn it, damn it. How could he be Tian Fengxing's own direct disciple? Impossible, absolutely impossible. How long has it been since he entered Tian Fengxing's own? Following behind Lu Tianming, Zhang Mingfeng roared angrily in his heart. The time Xiaochen entered Tian Fengxing's own was the same time as the time he entered Tianyue sacred sect. However, now, Xiaochen was already one of the top 10 direct disciples of Tian Fengxing's own, while he, Zhang Mingfeng, was only a core disciple. The imbalance in his heart, in addition to various feelings of envy and jealousy, made Zhang Mingfeng unwilling to believe that Xiaochen was Tian Fengxing's own direct disciple even if he was beaten to death. However, the reality was as such. Even if Zhang Mingfeng was unwilling to admit it, he couldn't change anything. As Lu Tianming left with his people, the atmosphere quickly eased up. Gumu also smiled as he bid farewell to Xiaochen. "You're one step ahead of me again. However, I will also become a direct disciple of Tianyue sacred sect very soon. It won't be too long." Gumu naturally encountered his own opportunity on Tiana continent. He had absolute confidence that he could defeat Lu Tianming in a short period of time. At that time, he could also become one of the top 10 direct disciples of Tianyue sacred sect. Hearing Gumu's words, Xiaochen smiled and nodded. If Gumu could become a direct disciple, Xiaochen would naturally be happy. He wasn't afraid that Gumu's strength would surpass his own. This was because, at this very moment, Xiaochen's gaze was no longer limited to direct disciples. Instead, it was locked onto the unreachable holy sons and holy daughters. After separating from Gumu, Xiaochen left under the escort of a group of Tian Fengxing's own disciples. Looking at Xiaochen's back as he left, the surrounding disciples gradually came back to their senses. Then, someone finally remembered Xiao Chen's matter and said excitedly, "What a pity! Xiao Chen. I remember now. He is indeed a direct disciple of Tianfeng Xingzong." Moreover, it was said that he entered Tianfeng Xingzong for less than 2 years and defeated He Chushuan to become one of the top 10 direct disciples of Tianfeng Xingzong. He entered Tianfeng Xingzong for less than 2 years and became a direct disciple. Such talent. Soon, some of Xiao Chen's deeds were dug up one after another as someone spoke. Oblivious to the discussions of the crowd after he left, he returned to the residence of the Heavenly Wind Saint sect. In a courtyard that could not be considered too big, this was the residence of the Heavenly Wind Saint sect in the wind-suppressing city. Not only were there disciples, but Tianfeng Xingzong's deacons and elders were also staying here. Upon hearing that Xiao Chen had arrived, everyone came out to welcome him. This time, Tianfeng Xingzong had a total of 3 half-step saint elders, 10 deacons, 10 core disciples, and a total of 2,000 ordinary disciples. After bowing to the 3 half-step saint elders and deacons, Xiao Chen turned to the crowd of disciples who were constantly gathering. This time, the disciples who came to wine-suppressing city voluntarily signed up. The higher-ups of Tianfeng Xingzong didn't force them. Xiao Chen also saw many familiar faces in the crowd, such as Mu Feng and the others. Also, among the 10 core disciples, Xiao Chen also saw Wang Fang. He didn't expect that even she would come, so Wang Zong was relieved. Xiao Chen greeted everyone. As for his residence, it was obvious that it had already been prepared for him. As a direct disciple, Xiao Chen's treatment was the same as the half-step saint elders. He also had his own room, unlike the other disciples who had to squeeze a few people into one room. He settled down in Tianfeng Xingzong's residence. As time passed, the people of the various sacred sects also arrived one after another, waiting for the battle with the Wind Ghost. However, it was a little strange that the Wind Ghost didn't rashly attack wind-suppressing city this time. At the border of the Wind Plain, there were already 6 million Wind Ghosts gathered, and the number of Wind Ghost Kings had increased to as many as 28. Even so, the Wind Ghost group still didn't have a limit to their attack, which made Saint Kuangli and the other saints in wind-suppressing city even more worried. At this time, there were already 5 saints in wind-suppressing city, but the Wind Ghost group didn't make any move, which made the 5 saints feel more and more worried. This wasn't a good thing. 6 million people had already gathered, but there was still no limit to their attack. This meant that there would be more Wind Ghosts gathering. At the same time, there must be a Wind Ghost Saint King behind them. Otherwise, how could the Wind Ghost group be so calm? Time passed slowly. It had been 7 days since wind-suppressing city was completely under martial law. During these few days, the disciples of the various sects had also received orders from the saints. The battle hadn't started yet, but the disciples of every sect were responsible for guarding the city walls. Tianfeng Xingzong was no exception. However, as a direct disciple, Xiao Chen naturally didn't need to do these things. On this day, the sky had just brightened when Xiao Chen received a message from the city lord's mansion. It said that Saint Kuangli had summoned the direct disciples of the various sects to the city lord's mansion for a meeting. Xiao Chen quickly arrived at the city lord's mansion. When Xiao Chen walked into the main hall in his Tianfeng robe, 5 direct disciples had already arrived. When they saw Xiao Chen, some of them smiled and nodded, while others chose to ignore him. As for Lu Tianming, he snorted and turned his head away, not even looking at Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen didn't care about Lu Tianming's attitude at all and sat down on his own chair. They didn't have to wait for long. Soon, the direct disciples of the ancient sacred state had all arrived. Saint Kuangli and the ancient sacred sects chosen slowly walked into the main hall. This time, the ancient sacred sect had also sent a chosen. This person was actually someone Xiao Chen knew. It was chosen Qinyu, whom he had met once in Tianfeng Xingzong. Qinyu walked side by side with Saint Kuangli. As a holy son, Qinyu's status was not lower than a saint's, and he was completely qualified to sit on the same level as a saint. Behind Qinyu was a pretty girl with a serious expression. No one knew who this girl was. In fact, among the direct disciples present, except for Xiaochen, this was probably the first time they had seen the Chosen. Because it was their first time seeing the Chosen, the direct disciples were a little nervous when Qinyu appeared. On the other hand, Qinyu still had that indifferent smile on his face. After seeing Xiaochen, Qinyu even took the initiative to step forward, ignoring Saint Kuangli, and smiled at Xiaochen. "Oh, junior brother Xiaochen, we meet again. I didn't expect that Tianfeng Xingzong would send you here. Is this fate? It seems that the two of us are really fated. Ha! Please add me to your collection. Please recommend me." End of chapter. Chapter 681. Qinyu said to Xiaochen with a cheeky grin. Following Qinyu's words, the atmosphere in the hall, which was originally extremely solemn, instantly changed. The other personal disciples all looked at Xiaochen with surprise and envy in their eyes. From Qinyu's words just now, it was not difficult to tell that Xiaochen and him knew each other. To be able to know a holy son was simply an incomparable honor. Don't think that there was not much of a difference between a personal disciple and a holy son. Did you see the girl behind Qinyu? She should be Qinyu's holy servant. Every holy son and holy daughter of the Tianhe continent was qualified to have a holy servant, and every holy servant had the strength of a personal disciple. As for the role of a holy servant, it was actually a bit like a maid. Of course, it was much more advanced and comprehensive than a maid. Not only could they take care of the holy son and holy daughter's daily necessities, but they could also fight for the holy son. What's more, they could even be the holy son's plaything. For example, the 4 holy Yin sect disciples who came with Yun Luan were actually Yun Luan's holy servants and had the strength of a personal disciple. In the face of the enthusiastic Qinyu, before Xiaochen could reply, the girl behind him fiercely slapped the back of Qinyu's head and said with a serious expression, "Holy son, now is not the time to reminisce. Don't forget why you're here." As a holy servant, the girl actually dared to treat Qinyu like this. However, what no one expected was that Qinyu was not the slightest bit angry. Instead, he said with a smile, "Little Isu, you're too serious. Didn't I just see an acquaintance?" Hearing Qinyu's words, the girl still said without a change in expression, "If you want to reminisce, there will be plenty of time later. I hope the holy son will prioritize business." The girl's name was Isu, and she was indeed Qinyu's holy servant. However, unlike Qinyu, Isu's personality was extremely serious. No matter what she did, she was incomparably serious. Faced with Isu's answer, Qinyu immediately surrendered. He smiled at Xiaochen and then walked to the main seat with a helpless expression. As he walked, he muttered in a low voice, "Sigh, how troublesome. Why does such a troublesome task have to fall on me?" "That's because you're the one with the most free time among all the saints of the ancient sacred sect. Naturally, only you can come," Isu replied calmly after hearing Qinyu's muttering. Qinyu and Saint Kuangli took their seats, while Isu stood behind Qinyu calmly. Saint Kuangli then said, "Don't worry. Everyone, the main reason I called you here today is to prepare for the battle." None of the saints dared to underestimate the wind ghost attack at all. Now that Saint Kuangli had brought up the deployment of the battle, the 8 personal disciples became serious and listened carefully to Saint Kuangli. In the face of the wind ghost's attack, they naturally had to rely on suppressing Wind City. It was impossible for them to go out of the city and fight the wind ghost. However, there were strong and weak wind ghosts. When facing ordinary wind ghosts, there would naturally be ordinary cultivators to deal with them. As for wind ghost kings and wind ghost saints, there would also be corresponding half-saints and saints to deal with them. As for Xiaochen and the other direct disciples, their mission was very simple, which was to fight the saint-blooded wind ghost. In simple terms, the saint-blooded wind ghost was the Saint clan of wind ghosts. It was a direct descendant of the wind ghost Saint King. Just like humans, the saint-blooded wind ghost was born with the bloodline power of the wind ghost Saint King. It was on a completely different level from ordinary wind ghosts. It could be said that the saint blood wind ghosts possessed high intelligence from birth. At the same time, their growth speed was also extremely fast. Moreover, their battle prowess was especially strong. In the same realm, in front of many humans, only personal disciples and holy sons could deal with them. The scale of the wind ghost's attack was already so large, so the saints guessed that the saint-blooded wind ghost might appear with the saint-blooded wind ghost Saint King. Therefore, while the saints were dealing with the saint-blooded wind ghost Saint King, the saint-blooded wind ghosts could only be dealt with by the direct disciples and Saint Chenyu. In the face of the large-scale attack of the wind ghost, Xiaochen and the others' mission was very simple, which was to fight the saint-blooded wind ghost. This was their only mission. As for the rest, they didn't need to intervene. There would be others to deal with it. After telling everyone about the saint-blooded wind ghost in detail, Saint Kuangli did not forget to remind them at the end. Don't underestimate the saint-blooded wind ghost. Its strength is definitely not weaker than your direct disciples. Therefore, once you encounter it, you must do your best to kill it. Otherwise, if a saint-blooded wind ghost runs amok, it will definitely be a disaster for the core disciples and ordinary disciples of the major sections. Saint Kuangli was afraid that they would underestimate the enemy, so he specially reminded them at the end. Hearing Saint Kuangli's words, Xiaochen and the others nodded solemnly in response. After explaining the deployment before the battle, Saint Kuangli waved his hand, indicating for everyone to disperse. Go back and prepare. In less than 3 days, the wind demons will probably launch a large-scale attack. All of you only need to remember to perform your duties, and be sure not to panic. Hearing Saint Kuangli's words, everyone stood up and bowed, then left the hall one after another. However, just as Xiaochen was about to leave, Chenyu suddenly called out to him. Junior brother Xiao, wait a moment. Hearing Chenyu's voice, Xiaochen turned his head and saw Chenyu walking up with a smile on his face. Chenyu naturally put his arm around Xiaochen's shoulder and said, Since we're done talking about business, let's go and have a few drinks. You don't know how much I've been holding back these past few days. Chenyu took the initiative to invite Xiaochen to have a drink. In this regard, Xiaochen could not refuse, so he nodded and agreed after thinking about it. However, Yi Su said indifferently at this time. No more than 3 jugs. Hearing Yi Su's words, Chenyu immediately said unhappily, Little Yi Su, don't be like this. It's rare for me to drink with junior brother Xiao. No. In the face of Chenyu's request, Yi Su directly refused without thinking. In this regard, Chenyu persisted for a while, but Yi Su refused to budge. In the end, he had no choice but to agree helplessly. No more than 3 jugs. Seeing that Chenyu was being controlled by his sacred servant, Xiaochen was quite curious. Of course, Xiaochen did not know what a sacred servant was. He only thought that Yi Su was Chenyu's woman, so he said with a smile. I didn't expect senior brother Chen to be a henpecked person. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Chenyu did not reply. Instead, Yi Su said indifferently, I'm not his woman, I'm only his sacred servant. Senior brother Xiaochen, don't misunderstand. Hearing the words sacred servant, Xiaochen was puzzled. Seeing this, Chenyu laughed heartily and walked out of the hall with Xiaochen in his arms. Along the way, Chenyu also told Xiaochen about the sacred servant. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 682. Along the way, he learned about the sacred servants from Chenyu. As they chatted, the 3 of them arrived at a garden in the backyard of the city lord's estate. This was Chenyu's residence. As a chosen, he was naturally treated much better than him. Not only did he have a room to himself, but he also had a small courtyard to himself. Without saying anything else, Yi Su went to the kitchen to get something to eat, while Xiaochen sat down in a pavilion in the garden under Chenyu's warm hospitality. Xiaochen learned a lot about the chosen from Chenyu. Of course, these were all very simple things. Even if Chenyu didn't say anything, Xiaochen would learn about them sooner or later. According to Chenyu, the holy sons and holy daughters not only had holy servants, but they also had real power in the ancient saint sect. They were not like the pro-disciples, who only had a title and did not have any power. There were a total of 4 chosen in the ancient sacred sect, and Chinyu was one of them. The ancient sacred sect had divided the disciples into 4 sacred palaces. Every sacred palace had disciples in attendance, and the 4 chosen were the masters of the sacred palaces. It could be said that within the ancient saint sect, the 4 saint sons were in charge of the 4 saint palaces. Apart from the saints, everyone else had to listen to the saint sons' orders. This was a real power. From this, one could see how big the gap between a saint son and a personal disciple was. Even a random saint servant was a personal disciple. Moreover, there was no limit to the number of sacred servants a chosen could have. It all depended on their preference. For example, Chinyu found it troublesome, so he only had Isu as a single sacred servant, while Yunluan had 4. Chinyu even told Shaochen that there was a chosen in the ancient sacred sect who had a total of 10 sacred servants. Every single one of them had the strength of a direct disciple. Now that he had a deeper understanding of the holy sons and holy daughters, Shaochen gained a lot from this meal. Chinyu, on the other hand, had a sorrowful expression because he didn't have enough wine. However, no matter how much he cried and begged, Isu wouldn't agree. In the end, Chinyu gloomily sent Shaochen out of the city lord manor. Only then did the two of them part ways. After returning from Chinyu's place and being summoned by Saint Quanli today, Shaochen clearly knew what his mission was. At the same time, after returning to his residence, Shaochen found that the 3 half-saint elders of Tianfengshengzong had also been summoned to the city lord's mansion. It was obvious that they had their own missions as well. From the most ordinary warriors to the ordinary disciples, core disciples, deacons, half-saint elders, and even the saints, every level of warriors had their own missions. At this moment, the saints had probably already informed everyone of their missions. Once the battle started, everyone only needed to follow the arrangements made before the battle and do their own things. As for other matters, they would naturally be dealt with by others. It wasn't the first time that he had experienced such a large-scale battle with millions of people. In the Tianqian continent, Shaochen had personally experienced such a large-scale battle. However, the scale of the battle this time was obviously much larger than the one on the heavenly Qin continent. After all, there were as many as 5 saints on the human side. However, in the battle on the heavenly Qin continent, there were only 2 saints in the end. After experiencing such a great battle, Shaochen was very much in agreement with the arrangements made by the saints. After all, in a battle of such a scale, it was impossible for anyone to turn the situation around with their own strength, unless their strength had reached a level that could pierce through the heavens and earth. Otherwise, they had to understand how to work together and perform their own duties. Everyone had to complete their missions well, so that they wouldn't lose the battle. Therefore, Shaochen was also very clear that once the battle broke out, he only had one goal, which was to stop the Saint Bloodwind ghost. As for the rest, it had nothing to do with him and he couldn't do anything about it. Time passed day by day. With the passage of time, the atmosphere in Jinfeng City became more and more tense. A somber atmosphere completely enveloped the entire city. Half a month after the news of the Wind Ghost's attack spread, in the early morning, there was a continuous drizzle in the sky and thick dark clouds covered the sky and earth. The dark clouds obscured the vision, giving people an extremely oppressive feeling. Today was a day of dense dark clouds, and it was on such a day that Jinfeng City, which had been calm in the tense atmosphere for half a month, finally woke up. With the sound of war drums, the entire Jinfeng City transformed into an operating war machine. According to the deployment before the battle, under the background of the earth-shaking war drums, groups of warriors ran wildly on the streets in an orderly manner. Human warriors were everywhere in the sky and on the ground. On the city wall that faced the wind plains, a continuous stream of warriors gathered. The originally wide city wall was now filled with people. Ordinary warriors and ordinary disciples of the holy sects stood on the city wall with determined expressions. Above them, the core disciples and deacons of the holy sects stood in the air. Above them were the half-saints and Xiao Chen's personal disciples. From the bottom to the top, there were a total of 3 layers of defense, forming a barrier against the wind ghost's attack. Early this morning, St. Quangli and the others in Jinfeng City finally received the news that the real 8 million wind ghosts had gathered at the border of the wind plain. They finally took action and began to approach Jinfeng City like waves. After receiving this news, the 5 saints naturally did not hesitate at all. They directly ordered the beating of the war drums, and the nearly 1 million warriors in Jinfeng City immediately prepared for battle according to the previous deployment. In terms of numbers, there was a huge gap between human warriors and wind ghosts. However, ordinary humans and ordinary wind ghosts were absolutely incomparable. An ordinary human warrior was definitely stronger than an ordinary wind ghost in the same realm. This was a comparison of the strength of the lowest level of the two sides. However, once it reached the level of the wind ghost king, the strength of the wind ghost would undergo an earth-shaking change. In other words, in the face of the wind ghost's attack, the most important thing was to see the performance of the half-saints, saints, Shaochen, and other personal disciples and saints on the human side. This was because they were dealing with the wind ghost king, the wind ghost saint king, and the saint-blooded wind ghost. Whether they could withstand the attacks of the wind ghost saint king was the key to the battle. After all, the strength of ordinary wind ghosts was actually nothing to be afraid of. As long as they could hold on, the warriors below would have enough time to deal with the numerous ordinary wind ghosts. However, on the other hand, if there was any mistake, and a wind ghost king, a wind ghost saint king, and a saint-blooded wind ghost were separated, the impact on the battle would be immeasurable. Please collect, vote, recommend. End of chapter. Chapter 683. Nearly 1 million human cultivators stood on top of the city wall, looking in the direction of the wind plains. Everyone's expression was extremely solemn. The drizzle continued to fall, and the sound of dripping rain could be heard as it fell on the ground. Nearly 1 million people gathered together, but it was very quiet. No one spoke, and even the sound of their breathing was very soft. Under such an oppressive atmosphere, no one knew how much time had passed. Suddenly, someone shouted, "It's here." Along with this unknown voice, everyone looked over. From the end of their line of sight, something that looked like a wave was rapidly approaching wind-suppressing city. At the end of their line of sight, there was a line between the sea and the sky, and the green wave was constantly approaching wind-suppressing city. As it got closer and closer, everyone could gradually see the true appearance of the green wave. It was actually countless wind ghost. The wind ghost's appearance was somewhat ferocious. Its teeth were sharp and protruded out of its face. Its eyes were also blood red, and its ears were triangular, standing upright. Sharp teeth, sharp claws, ferocious appearance, and green skin. This was how humans described the wind ghost. Millions of wind ghosts let out chilling cries. Their voices were extremely sharp and piercing to the ears. Facing the approaching wind ghost group, many people couldn't help but swallow their saliva. Their eyes couldn't help but flash with a hint of aggression. There was nothing they could do about it. There were too many wind ghosts. In front of the wind ghost group, wind-suppressing city was like a lone boat in the middle of the sea. It was as if the waves could knock it to the bottom of the sea at any time. Many people felt uneasy, especially the younger generation. Most of them had never experienced a wind ghost attack, and some of them had never even seen a wind ghost before. For a moment, everyone's hearts were in turmoil. But at this moment, from the city lord's mansion, 5 terrifying auras soared into the sky. It was almost as if they had materialized. Spiritual energy fluctuations that could be seen with the naked eye soared into the sky, as if they were going to tear apart the layers of dark clouds in the sky. Along with the appearance of these 5 terrifying auras, 5 figures appeared in the sky above the city lord's mansion. They were the 5 saints who guarded wind suppression city. The appearance of the saint gave everyone on the city wall an indescribable and terrifying pressure. It was like a shot of adrenaline to the hearts of the people on the city wall. Their originally frightened hearts slowly calmed down. The 5 saints appeared. They took a step forward and appeared in front of the crowd. As the saints of the present age, they were at the forefront of the crowd in the face of the wave-like wind ghost horde. They faced the ferocious-looking wind ghost horde head-on. Looking at the backs of the 5 saints, there were only 5 of them, but even against the 8 million wind demons, the 5 saints did not lose out in terms of aura. With a faint smile on his face, Saint Qingju laughed. These bastards are still so ferocious. Hearing Saint Qingju's words, another saint beside him replied with a smile, don't tell me you still expect the wind ghost to be as courteous as a human? That's not it. But even if they are opponents, I still hope that they look a little better. Saint Qingju's smile did not diminish. Facing the several million wind ghost horde, the 5 saints continued to chat casually. While the saints were chatting, the wind ghost horde was getting closer and closer. At this moment, they were only 10 miles away from Wind Suppression City. Without the slightest intention of stopping, the wind ghost howled even louder. Their speed seemed to have increased as well. It was as if they wanted to smash through all of Wind Suppression City's defenses with a single blow. Looking at the roaring wind ghost horde, Saint Kuangli, who was in the middle, took a step forward and shouted with his back facing the crowd behind him. Everyone, hold the swords in your hands tightly and face these evil ghosts. Even if you have to exhaust your last bit of flesh, you must not let these bastards take a single step into Wind Suppression City. Kill! The sonorous and powerful voice echoed in everyone's ears for a long time. As Saint Kuangli's last word fell, the human warriors standing on top of the city wall took out their spiritual weapons and held them tightly in their hands. Then, they charged out like ferocious beasts. On one side were the ferocious wind ghost horde, and on the other side were the human warriors brimming with killing intent. They were like 2 ancient beasts that had been exposed. The 2 sides collided head-on. The human warriors and the wind ghost horde clashed head-on. Saint Kuangli's previous words had completely ignited the fighting spirit in everyone's hearts. The little bit of resistance they originally had vanished in an instant on this bloody battlefield. Battle cries shook the sky. Looking at the battle that had already broken out, Xiaochen and the other personal disciples, as well as the half-saints, Saint Kuangli and the other 4 saints above the city wall, did not move. Their opponents had not yet appeared. They stood proudly in the sky. After the battle broke out, the real 28 Wind Ghost Kings appeared above the Wind Ghost Horde. Seeing the 28 Wind Ghost Kings appear, the half-saints standing with Xiaochen and the others took a step forward. Their figures directly passed the 5 saints in front of them and came to the front of the Wind Ghost Kings. Soldier against soldier, general against general. The Wind Ghost Kings were the half-saints' opponents. Therefore, without needing anyone to say anything, they had already taken the initiative to meet them. Human half-saints, do you still want to defend Wind Suppression City this time? In your dreams. Looking at the human half-saints in front of it, the leading Wind Ghost King sneered. Hearing the sneer of the Wind Ghost King, a half-saint said in a deep voice, "Bastards will always be bastards. Don't talk nonsense. Everyone, let's do it." As the voice of the half-saint fell, more than 20 half-saints attacked at the same time. For a moment, the terrifying aftermath of the battle was like the end of the world, shaking the sky and earth. It was rare to see a battle between half-saints in the past, but at this moment, there were 50 half-saints fighting fiercely together. In order to avoid the aftermath of the battle affecting the battlefield below, the half-saints also deliberately moved the battlefield to the sky. The Wind Ghost Kings did not refuse. The battle between half-saints had already broken out. At the same time, Saint Kuangli looked at the empty sky in front of him with a calm expression and a cold voice. Still not planning to come out? A bunch of bastards, hiding their heads and tails. Following Saint Kuangli's voice, 5 3-meter-tall Wind Ghost Saint Kings appeared. They were not much different from ordinary wind ghosts, except that their bodies were stronger and their faces were more ferocious. When the 5 Wind Ghost Saint Kings appeared, their auras swept out, causing the expressions of Xiaochen and the other personal disciples to change slightly. They were indeed comparable to saints. The auras of the Wind Ghost Saint Kings were really terrifying. As personal disciples, they could not even bear the simple aura of the Wind Ghost Saint Kings. Please collect, vote, recommend. End of chapter. Chapter 684. It was indeed difficult for Xiao Chen and the others to withstand the 5 Wind Ghost Saint Kings, who were comparable to saints. The pressure from the 5 Wind Ghost Saint Kings had reached an indescribable level. However, just as the 5 Wind Ghost Saint Kings unleashed their terrifying auras, Saint Kuangli and the others released their auras that weren't any weaker than the Wind Ghost Saint Kings. Instantly, the pressure on Xiao Chen and the others dissipated. Breathing a sigh of relief, Xiao Chen's direct disciple couldn't help but look at Saint Kuangli and the others. 5 saints and 5 Wind Ghost Saint Kings stood facing each other. Their auras were stronger than 1,000,000 soldiers. One of the 5 Wind Ghost Saint Kings let out an extremely uncomfortable laugh. 5 human saints. Ah, that's quite a lot. Human saints, why don't we negotiate? We'll only massacre Wind Suppression City and then retreat to the Wind Plains. How about it? It's not like Wind Suppression City hasn't been massacred by us Wind Ghosts before, so there's no need for a bloody battle. What do you think? The Wind Ghost Saint King said in an extremely mocking tone. Saint Qingju chuckled and replied, I think you should leave behind 1,000,000 Wind Ghosts for us, and we'll let you safely retreat to the Wind Plains. What do you think? What's the point of talking so much with them? Attack. We'll massacre Wind Suppression City today. As soon as Saint Qingju finished speaking, the other Wind Ghost Saint King clearly had a bad temper. He snorted coldly and chose to attack. Naturally, there was no room for negotiation between humans and Wind Ghosts. Not to mention, the Wind Ghost Saint Kuangli and the others couldn't possibly back down in the slightest. The 5 saints and the 5 Wind Ghost Saint Kings immediately engaged in a fierce battle. However, a battle between saints naturally couldn't be carried out here. After breaking through to the saint realm and grasping the power of laws, one could tear space apart. Therefore, a battle between saints was usually carried out in a different space. After all, the power of a saint was too terrifying. If they were to carry it out here, needless to say, even if they managed to stop the Wind Demon, the entire wind-suppressing city would definitely be destroyed. They also knew that only in a different space would the saints be able to truly have no scruples. The 5 saints and the 5 Wind Ghost Saint Kings tore space apart and disappeared into the void at the same time. Qinyu couldn't see how the battle between the saints was going, but he was still grinning cheekily. Really, this group of old men is really a headache when they get hot-blooded. They're even more enthusiastic than us youngsters. As the battles between the saints and the Wind Ghost Saint Kings and the saints and Wind Ghost Saint Kings broke out one after another, the only ones left standing on the city wall were Xiao Chen's personal disciple and Qinyu, the saint. As though he wasn't nervous at all, the smile on Qinyu's face didn't fade. But as soon as Qinyu finished his sentence, the Saint Blood Wind Ghost that hadn't shown up until now finally showed up. There were a total of 10 Saint Blood Wind Ghosts with green skin and ferocious expressions. Looking at the 10 Saint Blood Wind Ghosts, Qinyu shook his head helplessly and smiled bitterly. I thought I was lucky and didn't have to fight this time. Sigh, Qinyu indeed looked extremely innocent. Upon hearing his words, the leading Saint Bloodwine Ghost revealed a sinister smile and said, If you don't fight, I won't kill you. After all, I don't want to fight to the death with a human saint. How about that? The Saint Bloodwind Ghost who spoke was apparently the strongest among the 4 Saint Bloodwind Ghosts. It wasn't hard to tell from the expressions of the other 9 Saint Bloodwind Ghosts. It also knew that Qinyu was a human saint. It seemed like this Saint Bloodwind Ghost's IQ wasn't low. But after hearing the Saint Bloodwind Ghost's words, Qinyu shook his head and said with a smile, That's a good suggestion. But this time, it seems like we can't slack off anymore. Those old men have already put on their weapons and joined the battle personally. It seems like this time, we can only fight with real swords and spears. Upon hearing Qinyu's words, the Saint Bloodwind Ghost revealed a disappointed expression and said, Is that so? What a pity. But since that's the case, don't blame us. Attack. Tear these human geniuses apart for me. Its voice was filled with murderous intent. As soon as the Saint Bloodwind ghost finished speaking, the other 9 Saint Bloodwind ghosts behind it moved immediately. In response, Xiao Chen and the others also reacted immediately. Everyone shifted their feet and in an instant, the battle line was stretched. However, Xiao Chen and the others unanimously blocked the path of a Saint Bloodwind ghost, including Isu. Isu was not to be underestimated. She was Cheng Yu's saint servant, but her battle prowess had undoubtedly reached the level of a direct disciple. Ha, good reaction. Since that's the case, let's begin. My Wind Ghost clan, tear apart the enemies before you. Today, I only want to see Wind Suppression City dyed red with blood. Attack, the leading Saint Bloodwind ghost sneered as it watched Xiao Chen and the others move. Following its words, a battle between the top youths of both sides erupted. The Saint Bloodwind ghosts were all alarmed. The Saint Bloodwind ghost fighting against Xiao Chen slashed out with its claws. Its innately sharp claws tore through the air and struck towards Xiao Chen's heart. Facing the Saint Bloodwind ghost's attack, Xiao Chen wielded the Ink Dragon sword. He had no intention of dodging. He raised his sword and slashed out. The tip of the sword slashed out and collided with the sharp claws of the Saint Bloodwind ghost. The Ink Dragon sword was a supreme quality heaven spirit weapon, so there was naturally no need to doubt its sharpness. However, when the two collided, there was a metallic sound. With its innately sharp claws, the Saint Bloodwind ghost actually managed to block the sharpness of the Ink Dragon sword. With an indifferent expression, Xiao Chen said indifferently, "They are indeed a group of monsters. Their innately sharp claws are no weaker than the Ink Dragon sword." The hardness of the Saint Bloodwind ghost's claws somewhat exceeded Xiao Chen's expectations. However, when he thought about it, this was normal. After all, wind ghosts were not like humans. They did not know how to refine spirit treasures. When they fought, they could only rely on their sharp claws. Therefore, the sharp claws of a wind ghost were actually equivalent to a human's spirit treasure. No one gained the upper hand in the clash with Xiao Chen. In response, the Saint Bloodwind ghost sneered. "According to your human classification, you should be a direct disciple. Not bad, you do have the strength of a Saint Bloodwind ghost. However, you will still die today. Remember, my name is Wu Qi. I am the wind ghost who will kill you." As he spoke, Wu Qi's sharp claws flickered with green light. At the same time, the pair of extremely eye-catching claws seemed to be stimulated by something and actually grew again. In an instant, Wu Qi's pair of claws had more than doubled in size. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 685. His already terrifying claws doubled in length. This was the power of the Saint Bloodwind ghost. Using the power of his bloodline, he could strengthen his claws for a short period of time, doubling their power. Wu Qi's aura also began to rise as his terrifying claws grew. His eyes flashed with undisguised killing intent as he stared at Xiao Chen and spoke word by word. "Human, watch me tear you apart." As soon as he finished speaking, Wu Qi took a step forward. With a sonic boom, his body shot toward Xiao Chen like a cannonball. The huge and sharp claws of the demonic beast that were about to tear the beast apart suddenly attacked Xiao Chen. With a ferocious expression, the demonic beast shouted, "Die, human!" Square Heaven Sword Shadow. Facing Wu Qi's attack, Xiao Chen shouted softly. He then slashed out with his sword, using the Square Heaven Sword Shadow. The sky was filled with swords, and Wu Qi's attack was successfully blocked. Furthermore, Wu Qi's entire body was enveloped by sword light. At the same time, Xiao Chen did not stay idle. He pointed his finger and used the Tai sword finger. The horsemen, who were already exhausted from dealing with the sword shadows, had no time to react to the Tai sword finger attack. They were instantly swallowed up. After a series of killing moves, Xiao Chen switched from defense to offense. However, although the Tai sword finger successfully hit Wu Qi, it was clearly not enough to defeat him. As expected, Wu Qi destroyed the Tai sword finger in just a few breaths' time. Wu Qi appeared in front of Xiaochen again. There were several sword wounds on his body. Although they were not serious, they still made Wu Qi look rather miserable. Blood continuously flowed from his wounds. He did not suffer any substantial injuries, but it was undeniable that Xiaochen's attack had thoroughly angered Wu Qi. As a Saint Bloodwind ghost, Wu Qi was naturally arrogant. This arrogance was innate. Yet, he was injured by a human. Wu Qi's originally ferocious face became even more terrifying. He clenched his teeth, his eyes bloodshot as he coldly shouted, "I'll tear you apart." The anger in his heart had already reached its boiling point. As soon as he finished speaking, the Wu Qi attacked Xiaochen again. Wind ghosts did not know any martial techniques. They were very similar to demonic beasts. Their battle strength came from their bloodline and ability. Wu Qi's speed increased again. This time, he was clearly angry. Facing Xiaochen's square heaven sword shadow, Wu Qi snorted, "You can't stop me." With that, Wu Qi's claw slammed down. The sword shadows in front of him were instantly shattered. His terrifying claws seemed to tear space itself. After shattering the square heaven sword shadow, Wu Qi appeared in front of Xiaochen in a flash. He raised his claw high above his head and slammed down. In response, Xiaochen used the ink dragon sword to block above his head. The sound of metal colliding rang out. The claw and ink dragon sword fiercely clashed. But this time, Wu Qi did not hold back at all. His terrifying power flowed through the ink dragon sword and into Xiaochen's body. Resisting Wu Qi's terrifying power, Xiaochen gradually fell into a disadvantage. Sensing this, the murderous intent in Wu Qi's eyes grew even stronger. This human was simply courting death in a contest of strength. Wind ghosts were like demonic beasts. They were naturally stronger than humans. Human, die. With a cold roar, Wu Qi's strength increased explosively. But just as he was about to kill Xiaochen with a single swipe of his claw, a burst of golden light erupted from Xiaochen's body. Using the 100 refined battle body, Xiaochen, who had been forced to retreat, instantly stabilized himself with the help of the 100 refined battle body. At the same time, a power that was not weaker than Wu Qi's suddenly erupted. Wu Qi's expression changed drastically. Then, Xiaochen knocked away Wu Qi's claw with his sword and slashed with the ink dragon sword. The sword light flashed, but in the nick of time, Wu Qi nimbly dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding a vital spot. However, the sharp wind still left a gash on Wu Qi's face. After suffering 2 setbacks at Xiaochen's hands in a row, Xiaochen did not give Wu Qi a chance to catch his breath this time. Gaining the upper hand with one strike, Xiaochen leaped forward and slashed with the ink dragon sword again. The two immediately engaged in a fierce battle. In the fierce battle, Wu Qi grew more and more shocked. Xiaochen's physical strength was not inferior to his. It should be known that humans and wind ghosts each had their own merits, but in terms of strength, the wind ghost definitely had the upper hand. But Xiaochen did not give in. With the 100 refined battle body, Xiaochen's physical strength was not inferior to Wu Qi's at all. Damn it, Wu Qi cursed as he struggled to defend against Xiaochen's tide-like attacks. Things had somewhat exceeded Wu Qi's expectations. While Xiaochen and Wu Qi were engaged in a fierce battle, the other direct disciples were also engaged in a fierce battle with the sacred blood wind ghost. Something worthy of mentioning was that the combat strength of the wind ghost in battle with Qinyu wasn't the slightest bit inferior to Qinyu. According to the standards of humans, the wind ghost had clearly attained the level of a holy sun. Compared to Xiaochen and the others, Qinyu's battle was even more terrifying. After all, it was a battle between chosen. Strands of power of law surrounded Qinyu, each attack containing terrifying power. The space seemed to be unable to withstand the fierce battle between the two and began to show signs of collapse. With a palm strike, Qinyu and the Saint Blood Wind Ghost collided head-on. The two of them were forced to take several steps back at the same time. Halting their figures, Qinyu shook his somewhat numb arm and smiled helplessly. Your father is a wind ghost saint ruler, right? The sacred blood wind ghost was a descendant of a wind ghost saint ruler. However, there were naturally differences in strength among the sacred blood wind ghosts, and their strength was completely dependent on the density of their bloodline. For example, if a sacred blood wind ghost's ancestors were wind ghost saint rulers for 5 generations, then it would only be an ordinary sacred blood wind ghost. However, if it was a direct descendant of a wind ghost saint ruler, then its strength would be on a completely different level. For example, the sacred blood wind ghost fighting Qinyu was definitely a direct descendant of a wind ghost saint ruler. Either its father or mother had to be a wind ghost saint ruler, which was why it possessed such terrifying bloodline power. Hearing Qinyu's words, the sacred blood wind ghost sneered, "You've guessed correctly. As a reward, I can let you die a little faster." Qinyu pretended to shake his head helplessly and bitterly smiled, "Sigh, that's true. Actually, I really don't want to fight a direct sacred blood wind ghost to the death. Why don't you reconsider? Let's just wait until the battle ends and then retreat. What do you think? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 686. Qinyu's tone was extremely relaxed, as if he did not feel any pressure at all when facing a wind ghost. Of course, this was mainly because Qinyu did not plan on killing the wind ghost before him at all. Qinyu did not plan on fighting to the death, so he naturally did not feel much pressure. After all, at the level of a holy sun, they had the power of laws. It was very difficult for them to die. All they needed to do was delay the Saint Blood Wind Ghost and wait for the outcome of the battle to be decided. That was Qinyu's true plan. The Saint Blood Wind Ghost chuckled when he heard Qinyu's joking words. He spoke in an extremely relaxed manner. "Yes, you're right. And I admit that I really don't have much of a way to deal with you. Even if we fight for 3 more days, it'll still be difficult to decide the outcome. Both of them were chosen, so it would naturally be difficult to decide the outcome of the battle, let alone kill the other." Speaking to the wind ghost paused before revealing a confident smile. "It'll be difficult for us to decide the outcome of the battle, but we'll definitely be the victorious side this time." A gleam of light flashed through Qinyu's eyes when he saw how confident the wind ghost was. He vaguely sensed that something was off. As if he could tell what Qinyu was thinking, the wind ghost smiled. "We wind ghosts have fought with you humans for who knows how many years, so how could we not be familiar with your ancient sacred sect? In the face of such a large-scale wind ghost attack, your ancient sacred sect will definitely issue an ancient sacred token, right? And once the ancient sacred token appears, the chosen of your ancient sacred sect will definitely come personally. Am I right?" The wind ghost race clearly had some understanding of the ancient sacred token. They knew that once the ancient sacred token appeared, one of the chosen of the ancient sacred sect would have to come personally. It was precisely because of this understanding that the wind ghost race already had a corresponding countermeasure. The smile on its face became more and more confident as the wind ghost continued. "Since we already knew that one of the holy sons of your ancient saint sect would come here personally, how could we not make preparations in advance? Do you think that I'm the only one here who is a direct descendant of the holy bloodwind ghost?" Hearing this, Qinyu's expression changed for the first time. He frowned slightly. There was more than one wind ghost with sacred blood, which meant that among the 10 sacred blood wind ghosts that came this time, there was more than one that was comparable to a chosen. A solemn look flashed across the wind ghost's eyes. Seeing this, the sacred blood wind ghost said with a confident expression, "My name is Wu Huan. Actually, I have a younger brother." As he spoke, Wu Huan looked towards Wu Qi, who was fighting fiercely with Xiao Chen. Sensing Wu Huan's gaze, Qinyu also looked towards the place where Xiao Chen and Wu Qi were fighting. There was only a trace of hesitation before Qinyu shouted, "Junior Xiao Chen, retreat quickly." From Wu Huan's words, Qinyu was 100% certain that Wu Qi, who was fighting with Xiao Chen, was also a direct descendant of the sacred blood wind ghost with strength comparable to a chosen. If he wanted Xiaochen to retreat quickly, the current Xiaochen simply did not have the strength to contend against a direct descendant of the sacred blood wind ghost. However, although Qinyu had warned Xiaochen immediately, he was still a little slow. Almost at the same time, Wu Qi, who was fighting with Xiaochen, no longer had the anger from before. An extremely cold smile appeared on his face. Big brother has finally spoken. Boy, you can die now. Previously, in order to numb the human direct disciples, Wu Qi had been deliberately suppressing his strength. Now that he received the signal from his brother, Wu Huan, Wu Qi knew that he did not have to hide his strength anymore. He had to kill Xiaochen as soon as possible and then defeat the human direct disciples in one fell swoop. As soon as Wu Qi finished speaking, Xiaosheng, who was inside Xiaochen's body, immediately sensed something and hurriedly shouted to Xiaochen, "Boy, retreat quickly. He's a direct descendant of the sacred blood wind ghost." Xiaosheng also told Xiaochen to retreat quickly, but he was still a step too late. At this moment, Wu Qi's aura began to soar, more than 10 times stronger than before. Compared to before, Wu Qi's aura was like the difference between heaven and earth. Xiaochen's expression changed drastically. He immediately retreated, but Wu Qi's attack was already upon him. His sharp claws slashed down fiercely. This time, the terrifying strength of the claws made all of Xiaochen's defenses seem to be in vain. Xiaochen's defenses were blasted apart like a hot knife through butter, and then the claws viciously smashed into Xiaochen's chest. 3 bloody gashes were deeply imprinted on Xiaochen's chest. Through the wounds, one could already see the ghastly white bones. One strike had severely injured Xiaochen. However, Wu Qi was not at all happy about this. Instead, he muttered with a puzzled expression. Strange. Wu Qi did not hide his strength in that attack. Although it was just a casual attack, Xiaochen was not directly torn apart. This puzzled Wu Qi. After the previous battle, Wu Qi naturally had a certain understanding of Xiaochen's strength. He originally thought that he would be able to tear Xiaochen's body apart without hiding his strength, but now, he only managed to leave 3 bone-deep gashes on Xiaochen's chest. Xiaochen was a little surprised. Of course, all of this was thanks to the tempered battle body. If it had not been for the tempered battle body, Xiaochen would have definitely died from that blow. Xiaochen fell from the sky with a loud bang. His body smashed into the ground, creating a deep crater. Smoke and dust rose everywhere. Lying in the crater, Xiaochen's eyes flashed with deep shock. It had only been a few breaths of time, but Wu Qi's strength was as different as heaven and earth. At the same time, Xiaosheng asked nervously, "Boy, are you all right?" "I won't die yet, but his strength." Xiaochen gritted his teeth and replied to Xiaosheng's question. Xiaosheng was secretly relieved that Xiaochen's life was not in danger for the time being. Then, he explained to Xiaochen. "Boy, that sacred blood wind ghost is not an ordinary sacred blood wind ghost. He is a direct sacred blood wind ghost. His father and mother are sacred blood wind ghost kings, so his bloodline power is much stronger than ordinary sacred blood wind ghosts. In terms of strength, he is already at the level of a holy son. It's normal that you are not his match." Wu Qi had concealed his strength before, but now, he finally revealed his ferocity. Upon hearing Xiaosheng's words, Xiaochen endured the pain and said softly, "Direct sacred blood wind ghost. In other words, there are 2 sacred blood wind ghosts that are comparable to holy sons. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend me." End of chapter. Chapter 687. There were 2 direct saint-blooded wind ghosts, which meant that there were 2 chosen among the saint-blooded wind ghosts, while Qinyu was the only chosen on the human side. Xiaochen was blasted out of the sky with a single claw. What happened to Xiaochen naturally attracted the attention of others, such as Yisu, Lu Tianming, and the other personal disciples. They all subconsciously looked at Wu Qi, their eyes full of disbelief. They were evenly matched just a moment ago, but in the blink of an eye, Xiaochen was seriously injured with a single slap. This was simply unheard of. Faced with the shock of Yi Su, Lu Tianming, and the others, the saint-blooded wind ghost also sneered. Ha, Brother Wu Qi is a direct saint-blooded wind ghost. According to your human classification, Brother Wu Qi is a chosen, ha. Wu Qi's outburst actually boosted the strength of the saint-blooded wind ghost. Of the two direct saint-blooded wind ghosts, Wu Huan was holding back Chen Yu. As for Wu Qi, he could be said to be an invincible existence. At the very least, the personal disciples couldn't stop him at all. Just like Xiaochen, he was sent flying with a single slap. Moreover, even if he wasn't dead, he would definitely be seriously injured. Hearing the sneers of the saint-blooded wind ghost, everyone's expression became extremely heavy and ugly. No one had expected there to be two direct saint-blooded wind ghosts. Their expressions were ugly, and a feeling of despair spread in their hearts. At the same time, Chen Yu directly took out a sound transmission talisman and used it without any hesitation. This voice transmission talisman was not meant to be sent back to the ancient saint sect. Instead, it was meant for another sage of the ancient saint sect. Using this voice transmission talisman, Chen Yu thought to himself helplessly, I wonder if I can make it in time. But, since things have come to this, there's no other choice. Seeing that Chen Yu used the sound transmission talisman, Wu Huan didn't stop him. He sneered and said, You still want to contact the other chosen? Unfortunately, it's too late. He guessed that Chen Yu was contacting the other chosen of the ancient sacred sect, but even if they used the transportation formation, it would take at least an incense stick's worth of time to arrive. That time was enough for Wu Qi to kill all the personal disciples present. Even if the other chosen came, it would be useless. Chen Yu didn't answer Wu Huan's sneer. Now that things had come to this point, there was no other way. Although the hope was slim, it was better than doing nothing. Can you hold on for an incense stick's time? The ancient sacred sect sighed. Chen Yu's sect side was. However, someone had to be able to hold Wu Qi for an incense stick's worth of time. But in the current situation, it was probably impossible. Because, Wu Chen Yu, Chen Yu, Chen chosen, Chen, wind. RRR. Chen is Chen's. Su Chen's Chen, Wu Chen S Chen's Chen's S. If you don't die the first time, let's do it again. I want to see how many times you can hold on. Wu Qi was indeed surprised that he couldn't kill Xiaochen in one strike, but it didn't matter. At most, he could do it again. This time, Wu Qi was absolutely confident that he could tear Xiaochen to shreds. Wu Qi stepped forward and walked towards the pit where Xiaochen was. At the same time, Xiaochen struggled to stand up. However, due to his severe injuries, even standing was a problem for Xiaochen, let alone fighting Wu Qi. Moreover, Xiaochen didn't have the strength to fight against Wu Qi, who was no longer hiding his strength. As the dust settled, one could vaguely see Wu Qi's figure approaching. Xiaochen smiled helplessly. He didn't know what to say. This was the second time he had met a chosen, and it was the same. He couldn't resist at all. Just as Xiaochen was feeling disappointed, Xiaoxing's voice suddenly rang out in Xiaochen's mind. Kid, that little rascal Chen Yu just used the voice transmission talisman. I believe that the ancient sacred sect's reinforcements will arrive soon. Xiaoxing had already seen Chen Yu use the voice transmission talisman. However, when he heard Chen Yu's words, Xiaochen smiled bitterly and said, The problem is, who can go against the Wu Qi? I can't even take one strike from him. As long as they could hold on until the other chosen arrived, they could still fight. However, Chen Yu was being held back by Wu Huan. Who could stop Wu Qi? Hearing Xiaochen's words, Xiaoxing seemed to have a plan. He said calmly, Kid, I'll borrow your body. With the power of my remnant soul, I should be able to hold off Wu Qi for a while until the other chosen arrive. No one could stop Wu Qi. At this time, Xiaoxing could only take action himself. He could temporarily control Xiaochen's body through his saint soul. Only then would he be qualified to fight against Wu Qi. Of course, this was only a short-term solution. Once the battle dragged on, Xiaoxing wouldn't be able to stop Wu Qi. After all, Xiaoxing was only a saint soul and his power was very limited. Hearing Xiaoxing's words, Xiaochen knew that this was the only way. He didn't say anything and relaxed his mind. At the same time, a strange power slowly spread out from Xiaoxing's saint soul, spreading to every corner of Xiaochen's body. For a moment, Xiaochen felt that he had lost control of his body. His consciousness still rejoiced, but he couldn't control his body anymore. It was as if he had become a bystander. He knew that his body had been controlled by Xiaoxing. When Xiaoxing took control of Xiaochen's body, the surrounding smoke and dust had completely dissipated. Wu Qi had arrived in front of Xiaochen and looked down at Xiaochen. Wu Qi sneered. "Human, you can die now. This time, I'll tear you apart." With that, Wu Qi no longer hesitated and once again slammed his claw towards Xiaochen. Seeing this, the faces of Qinyu, Yi Su, Lu Tianming, and the others changed. There was no doubt in their hearts that Xiaochen was definitely going to die this time. They all thought that Xiaochen was definitely going to die. However, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Xiaochen, no, it should be Xiaoxing now, raised his sword and slashed at Wu Qi's claws. The faint power of loss wrapped around the blade and whizzed out, colliding fiercely with Wu Qi's claws. When the two collided, to everyone's surprise, Wu Qi's claw didn't break Xiaoxing's attack. On the contrary, Xiaoxing's sword successfully blocked Wu Qi's attack. Seeing this, everyone, including Wu Huan and the Saint Bloodwind Ghost, said in disbelief, "How is this possible? He blocked it? Please add it to your collection, monthly vote, recommend it." End of chapter. Chapter 688. Just when everyone thought that Xiaochen was going to die, Xiaochen actually managed to block the attack of Wu Qi, who had the strength of a son of God. He didn't even have the strength to resist before, but now he successfully blocked the attack. The huge contrast stunned everyone. Of course, they didn't know that the one who blocked the attack wasn't Xiaochen, but Xiaoxing. He was just borrowing Xiaochen's body. How is this possible? How can this human block Brother Wu Qi's attack? A Saint Bloodwind Ghost said in disbelief. Even Wu Huan's expression changed drastically. Could this human be the holy son of the ancient sacred sect? No, he's definitely not one of the chosen of the ancient sacred sect. Wu Huan did not expect that Xiaochen would be able to block Wu Qi's attack. Just like Wu Huan, Qinyu's face was also filled with excitement. However, unlike Wu Huan, Qinyu's eyes were filled with excitement. If Xiaochen could block Wu Qi's attack, didn't that mean that Xiaochen could contend against Wu Qi? If that was the case, then there was still a chance. Brother Xiaochen didn't need to defeat Wu Qi. He just needed to hold on for an incense stick's worth of time. Thinking of this, Qinyu didn't care too much. He immediately shouted to Xiaochen, "Junior Xiaochen, stop Wu Qi. You don't need to do too much. The other chosen will arrive in an incense stick's worth of time." Now that he was being held back by Wu Huan, he could only place all his hopes on Xiaochen. After all, other than Xiaochen, the other direct disciples couldn't stop Wu Qi. Wu Huan's face darkened when he heard Qinyu's words. He had thought that everything was under his control, but Xiaochen had unexpectedly appeared. Wu Huan's confident expression finally darkened. Wu Huan shouted coldly as he slammed his claw down fiercely. "You want to stop Wu Qi with such calmness? Dream on." Seeing that Wu Huan was enraged, Qinyu chuckled as he blocked Wu Huan's attack. "What's wrong? Are you flustered and exasperated?" Xiaochen gave Qinyu hope, but it also made Wu Huan panic. The two of them once again engaged in a fierce battle. This time, Wu Huan was obviously serious. However, it was still somewhat impossible for Wu Huan to take down Qinyu with his strength. The two of them fought fiercely. Wu Huan was mostly venting his anger. While Wu Huan and Qinyu were engaged in a fierce battle, Wu Qi, who had just recovered from his shock, glared at Xiaochen with burning anger in his eyes. An indescribable sense of humiliation welled up in him. It was as if Xiaochen had been toying with him since the beginning of the battle. he felt as if he was being toyed with by Xiaochen. Every time Wu Qi thought that victory was in his grasp and that he could kill Xiaochen in one blow, Xiaochen would be able to block his attack for the first time. This made Wu Qi feel extremely humiliated. His teeth chattered as if they were about to be crushed. The killing intent in his heart had already exploded. Wu Qi slammed his claw down again, this time with even more force. He shouted angrily, "Human, go to hell!" He was completely enraged. However, in the face of Wu Qi's attack, Xiaosheng, who was controlling Xiaochen's body, slashed out with his sword again without any change in expression. The sword and the sharp claw collided fiercely once again. The sound of metal clashing rang out once more. At the same time, the ground where the two of them were standing shattered with a loud boom. Wu Qi clearly did not hold back at all. In another head-on clash, Xiaosheng was forced back. However, he managed to block Wu Qi's attack, but he was still at a disadvantage. Xiaosheng staggered back 7 steps before he managed to stop himself. The blood in his chest churned. With great difficulty, he resisted the urge to vomit blood. Xiaosheng smiled bitterly. "It's really not easy. Holy son of the ancient sacred sect, you have to come quickly. Otherwise, I won't be able to hold on for long." He felt as if he was a tiger that was bullied by a dog. However, there was nothing he could do. After all, Xiaosheng was only left with a wisp of his soul. He had already done his best to hold off Wu Qi for half an hour. In contrast to Xiaosheng's helplessness, Wu Qi was completely enraged when he saw his attack being blocked again. With a roar, Wu Qi attacked Xiaochen once more. He was completely enraged. Wu Qi's attacks fell like a tidal wave, not giving Xiaochen any time to breathe. Facing the enraged Wu Qi, Xiaosheng, who was controlling Xiaochen's body, struggled to raise his sword to resist. However, the gap between the two of them gradually became apparent. As the battle continued, Xiaosheng began to show signs of fatigue. However, even though Xiaosheng was completely at a disadvantage, it would not be easy for Wu Qi to win. At least until now, Wu Qi had not been able to break through Xiaosheng's defense. The terrifying shockwaves from the battle continued to sweep out. The shockwaves from the battle between Xiaosheng and Wu Qi were only slightly weaker than those from Wu Huan and Qin Yu. Feeling the terrifying aftershocks, the rest of the direct disciples were already in a state of shock. Xiaochen was able to hold on for so long in the face of the Wu Qi's frenzied attacks. It was no exaggeration to say that if any of them had been in Xiaochen's place, they would have been torn to pieces by the Wu Qi. Is Xiaochen's battle strength so strong? How can he only be Tian Fengxingzong's 10th direct disciple? Even the first direct disciple would not have such strength. Qin Yu's Saint Servant Isu thought to himself. Many direct disciples had the same thoughts as Isu. The strength that Xiaochen had displayed was really too terrifying. It had already surpassed the scope of a direct disciple. With such battle strength, how could Xiaochen only be Tian Fengxingzong's 10th direct disciple? It was absolutely impossible. Lu Tianming was as shocked as the others, but there was also a trace of fear in his heart. After all, he had some conflicts with Xiaochen before. Now that he saw that Xiaochen actually had such strength, Lu Tianming naturally felt fear in his heart. After all, based on the battle strength that Xiaochen had displayed, perhaps one move was enough to take Lu Tianming's life. The development of the situation was unexpected. Wu Qi, who had been attacking for a long time, had completely gone crazy. He knew very well that although he had the advantage now, if he still could not take down Xiaochen, then the other saints of the ancient sacred sect would arrive. At that time, all their preparations would be in vain. Because of his anxiety, Wu Qi also attacked crazily without regard for anything else. He wanted to take down Xiaochen in the shortest time possible. Please add, please vote, please recommend. End of chapter. Chapter 689. Facing the desperate Wu Qi, Xiaosheng was under a lot of pressure. Fortunately, Xiaochen's body was supported by the tempered battle body. Otherwise, he would have reached his limit a long time ago. Xiaoxing had been maintaining a defensive posture. He knew very well that it was impossible to defeat Wu Qi with just a wisp of soul in Xiao Chen's body. Moreover, Xiaoxing could not exhaust all the energy of this wisp of soul, because once he did, he would directly disappear. Wu Qi only cared about defense. Facing Xiaoxing's impenetrable defense, Wu Qi almost vomited blood. He had clearly suppressed Xiaoxing, but he could not do anything about it. This feeling was really sullen to the extreme. Of course, Wu Qi did not know that Xiaoxing was only able to do this because of his experience. No matter how down and out he was, Xiaoxing was once the #1 saint of the Tianhe continent. His combat experience was extremely rich, especially when compared to Wu Qi, a junior like him. After failing to break through Xiaoxing's defenses, Wu Qi could not help cursing angrily as he watched the battle drag on. "Damn it, human, do you only know how to hide in your shell like a turtle?" Wu Qi was really anxious because the incense stick's time was almost up. Who knew when the other saints of the ancient sacred sect would arrive? It was not just Wu Qi. On the other side, Wu Huan was also calmly trying his best to shake off Qin Yu's entanglement and help Wu Qi. But how could Qin Yu not know what he was thinking? He entangled Wu Huan tightly, not giving him any chance to escape. Wu Huan also shouted angrily in response. "Qin Yu, do you want to fight to the death with me?" Qin Yu was holding Wu Huan back, while the Wu Qi seemed to be unable to do anything to Xiaoqin. Wu Huan roared. Qin Yu said with a smile. "Fight to the death? Don't you think that's ridiculous? It seems that the intelligence of the Wind Ghost clan is indeed worrying." Qin Yu was indeed amused by Wu Huan's roar. However, he was also very curious about Xiaoqin. He did not expect Xiaoqin to have such strength. If not for Xiaoqin, Lu Tianming and the other personal disciples would have died at the hands of the Wu cavalry. It had to be said that Wu Huan's plan was indeed good. They knew that the ancient sage sect would only send one holy son, so they sent 2 wind ghosts with saint blood. Unfortunately, no matter how much Wu Huan calculated, he absolutely did not take into account the variable Xiaoqin. Because of Xiaoqin's efforts, it was now the Saint Blood Wind Ghost's turn to fight. After all, the longer the battle dragged on, the more disadvantageous it would be for them. Once the other saint children of the ancient sacred sect received the news and rushed over, the situation would be completely different. He tried his best to break free from Qin Yu's control and help the Wu cavalry, but no matter what method he used, Qin Yu was like a maggot that stuck to him. The smile on Qin Yu's face grew brighter and brighter as he dodged Wu Huan's punch. The time it takes for an incense stick to burn is almost up. Looks like your plan is going to fail this time. Wu Huan clenched his teeth when he heard this. However, he was already cursing Xiaoqin in his heart. The plan this time had been completely ruined by Xiaoqin alone. His killing intent towards Xiaoqin had reached its peak. At the same time, Xiaosheng, who had been resisting the Wu cavalry's crazy attacks, was also suffering. If the brats of the ancient sage sect don't come, I won't be able to hold on. Xiaosheng had already reached his limit after resisting the Wu cavalry for so long. To be precise, Xiaoqin's body was about to reach its limit. Once Xiaoqin's body couldn't hold on, Xiaosheng would be powerless no matter how powerful he was. He could clearly feel that his body was constantly reaching its limit. Not only Xiaosheng, but even Xiaoqin, who had lost control of his body, could feel it. He was also constantly urging the saint children of the ancient sage sect to hurry up and appear. However, Xiaoqin and Xiaosheng's prayers didn't seem to have any effect. After another 100 moves, Xiaoqin's body finally reached its limit. There was a momentary deviation in his movements, and this small deviation was accurately grasped by the Wu cavalry. With a claw, he broke through Xiaosheng's defense. Wu Qi sneered. "Ha, human, you still have to die in the end. Die." Finally, he broke through Xiaosheng's defense. At this moment, Wu Qi let out a long sigh of relief. His hands did not stop moving. His sharp and huge claws went straight for Xiaoqin's head, as if he wanted to smash Xiaoqin's head into pieces. Seeing Wu Qi's claws getting closer and closer, Xiao Sheng and Xiao Chen couldn't do anything because their bodies couldn't react at all. While Wu Qi was laughing heartily and Xiao Chen and Xiao Sheng were on the brink of despair, a green light flashed from Wind Suppression City. Wu Qi's face darkened in the face of this green light attack. He only had two choices. He could either stop and avoid this green light, or he could continue to attack. However, he would most likely be injured by this green light in the end. Without much hesitation, Wu Qi chose to stop. In this way, Xiao Chen managed to save his life at the last moment. As the green light forced the dark cavalry to retreat, a handsome young man wearing a white robe with a large ancient character embroidered on the back of the robe walked out of the wind-suppressing city in large strides. With the appearance of this young man, Qin Yu, who was fighting fiercely with Wu Huan, revealed an unnatural expression and said, "Why is this god of death here?" Facing this young man, Qin Yu's expression was somewhat unnatural. From his expression, it was not difficult to see that Qin Yu, who had always been carefree, was somewhat helpless in front of this young man. Sure enough, just as Qin Yu finished speaking, the youth had already arrived in front of Wu Qi, a navy blue spear in his hand as he spoke expressionlessly. Direct sacred blood wind ghost. At the same time, the young man's gaze shifted from Wu Qi to Qin Yu, who was still fighting fiercely. "You need to ask the sect for help for such a small matter? Qin Yu, it seems like you're getting worse and worse." He was clearly dissatisfied with Qin Yu. In response, Qin Yu smiled apologetically. "That? Senior Hu Fei, aren't there two direct sacred blood wind ghosts? I can't handle them alone." The name of the young man was Hu Fei. Just like Qin Yu, he was also a saint son of the ancient saint sect. Qin Yu, who was well aware of Hu Fei's character, knew that this fellow was a killing god who only knew how to cultivate. Therefore, when he saw that it was actually Hu Fei who had arrived, Hu Fei was completely helpless. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.